At 4 in the morning, Lorenzo Vieri, feared Mafia boss, untouchable king of the underworld, walks into his penthouse expecting the same thing he's found for 12 years. His wife, awake, waiting. Instead, he finds nothing. Empty closets, silent rooms, a letter on the kitchen counter that shatters everything he thought he knew. She didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't give him the chance to fix it. Isabella just left. And for a man who controls entire cities with a single word, this is the one thing he can't command back. Like this video, comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels, and stay until the end. Because what Lorenzo discovers next will change everything.
The
elevator doors slid open with their usual whisper, delivering Lorenzo Vieri into the marble foyer of his penthouse. 4 a.m. The city below still pulsed with the kind of nightlife that paid him tribute in cash and fear. But up here, 43 floors above it all, the world narrowed to expensive silence and the faint scent of Isabella's lavender soap. He loosened his tie, custom silk, blood spatter resistant, though tonight had been clean. Negotiations, not executions. The Calabrese family had finally seen reason about the ports. Lorenzo's kind of reason, which involved photographs of their youngest son leaving a private school and a very calm explanation of what could happen to children who wandered off campus without proper security. Effective. Civilized, even. No one had to die. The apartment stretched before him in shadow and luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Chicago's skyline like a painting he owned. Because in many ways, he did. 3 mayors, 2 police commissioners, and a federal judge later, Lorenzo Vieri had built an empire that didn't show up on Forbes lists, but could buy and sell half the companies that did. He expected Isabella in the living room, curled into the corner of their white sofa, with a book she'd pretend to read while waiting for him. That's how it had been for 12 years. He'd come home to her patience, her quiet presence, her willingness to exist in the margins of his dangerous life without complaint. Loyal. God, she'd been so loyal. The living room sat empty. Lorenzo frowned, dropped his keys in the crystal dish by the door, the baccarat one Isabella had picked out during their honeymoon in Paris, back when her eyes still lit up at his gifts. He walked deeper into the penthouse, dress shoes clicking against marble. Bella? Nothing. Their bedroom door stood open. The lights were off. Not unusual. She'd probably gotten tired of waiting, gone to sleep. He had told her not to wait up anymore. Told her a dozen times, actually, but she never listened. Isabella had this stubborn streak hidden under all that grace, this quiet insistence on being there when he came home, no matter the hour. He stepped into the bedroom and flipped the switch. The bed was made, not slept in and remade. Made with the kind of precision that came from hotel housekeeping or a bed no one intended to use. The decorative pillows, the ones Isabella always removed before sleep and he always complained about, sat arranged in their full useless glory. Lorenzo's chest tightened, just slightly, barely perceptible, the kind of tightness he'd learned to ignore in his line of work because showing concern was showing weakness. He crossed to her closet, opened it, empty. Not the empty of someone doing laundry or packing for a trip. The empty of erasure. No dresses, no shoes, no silk scarves folded in their drawer. The built-in jewelry case stood open, its velvet compartment stripped. He'd given her a fortune in diamonds and sapphires over the years, guilt gifts mostly, if he was being honest, and she'd taken every piece. His hand gripped the closet door frame. The wood creaked under pressure. Isabella! His voice bounced off empty walls. He moved through the penthouse like a man searching for evidence at a crime scene, because that's what this was, wasn't it? A crime. A betrayal. A violation of everything they'd built together. Her office, cleared. The desk where she used to sketch, she'd been an art student when they met, probably still sketched when he wasn't around, held nothing but dust outlines where her supplies had been. The bathroom, empty of her products. No makeup cluttering the counter, no expensive French moisturizer, no prescription bottles with her name printed in that clinical font. The guest room, untouched, because Isabella had never needed distance from him before. Had she? Lorenzo found himself standing in the kitchen, breathing harder than a walk through his own apartment should warrant. The granite countertop gleamed, spotless except for a single cream-colored envelope propped against the espresso machine. His name in her handwriting. Lorenzo. He stared at it for a full minute before picking it up. The envelope felt expensive. She'd always had taste, his Isabella. Probably the same stationery she used for thank you notes to his business associates' wives. The kind of social graces that made her perfect for his world. His hands shook. Lorenzo Vieri's hands never shook. He'd held guns to men's heads without a tremor, signed death warrants while eating breakfast, watched buildings burn with the steady pulse of someone checking the weather. But this envelope made his hand shake. He tore it open. The letter inside was short. 3 paragraphs in her elegant script, the kind of penmanship they didn't teach anymore. She'd once told him her grandmother made her practice letters every summer, copying out poetry until her hand cramped. He'd found it charming, that old-world refinement. Now those careful letters formed words that detonated his world. Lorenzo, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I won't tell you where. Not because I fear you'll find me, but because it doesn't matter. This isn't about geography. This is about the fact that I can't pretend anymore, and I'm finally strong enough to stop trying. I'm not leaving you out of anger. I'm leaving because staying would kill the last piece of who I am. You'll want to know why. You'll want to fix it, negotiate it, control it like you control everything else. But there's nothing to fix. This is simply what happens when you mistake patience for permission. I wish you well. I mean that. But I wish myself better. Isabella. He read it 3 times. Then a 4th. As if repetition would change the words, reveal some hidden message, some clue he'd missed. Nothing changed. She was gone. Lorenzo sank into one of the kitchen chairs, the ones Isabella had picked out from that boutique furniture store in River North. Everything in this apartment, he realized with sudden clarity, Isabella had chosen. He'd bought it, sure, but she'd made it a home. And now she'd unmade it just as thoroughly. His phone buzzed. Marco, his second in command. All clear on the Calabrese situation. They're sending the signed agreements tomorrow. Victory. Another territory secured. Another family brought to heel. Lorenzo set the phone face down on the table and stared at the letter. Juts. The sun came up somewhere around 6. Lorenzo watched it happen from the kitchen table, the letter still in his hand, his mind churning through possibilities like a computer running scenarios. She'd left before. Well, no, she'd threatened to leave before. Early in their marriage, when she still had fire in her, when she'd yell about his hours and his secrets and the blood she could sometimes smell on his clothes even after he'd showered. He'd handled it. Flowers, jewelry, promises to be more present, and she'd stayed. This was different. This was surgical. Marco arrived at 7:30, letting himself in with the spare key Lorenzo provided to his inner circle. He stopped short when he saw his boss still in last night's suit, unshaven, sitting motionless at the kitchen table. Boss? Lorenzo handed him the letter without a word. Marco read it, his expression carefully neutral. At 55, Marco had been with Lorenzo since the beginning, back when they were just neighborhood kids with more ambition than sense. He'd buried bodies for Lorenzo, lied to federal prosecutors, taken bullets. But even Marco looked uncomfortable holding that letter. She really gone? Everything's gone, Lorenzo said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, flat, mechanical. Clothes, jewelry, papers. Like she was never here. Marco set the letter down gently. You want me to find her? Of course I want you to find her. The words came out sharper than intended. Track her credit cards, bank accounts, phone. She can't have gotten far. But even as he said it, Lorenzo knew better. Isabella was smart. Smarter than he'd given her credit for, apparently. If she'd planned this, and the letter suggested she had, she wouldn't have left a trail. I'll make calls, Marco said. What do you want me to tell the crew? Nothing. Lorenzo stood, the chair scraping against tile. This is personal. Keep it quiet. Marco nodded and left. Lorenzo heard the elevator doors close and found himself alone again in the too quiet penthouse. He showered, shaved, changed into a fresh suit, charcoal brioni, Italian cut, the kind of armor he wore into negotiations and wars. His reflection in the bathroom mirror looked normal, controlled, powerful. Inside, something had cracked. By noon, Marco had preliminary information. They met at Lorenzo's social club, a legitimate front that served the best espresso in Little Italy and operated as his unofficial office. The back room held a conference table that had witnessed more consequential decisions than most boardrooms. Her bank account's been drained, Marco reported, sliding a folder across the table. She cleaned it out 3 days ago. $47,000. Lorenzo frowned. That's it? I gave her access to, I know, accounts with millions. She touched one. The joint checking, the one she used for household expenses and shopping. Marco tapped the folder. She didn't take your money, boss. Just hers. Something about that detail lodged in Lorenzo's chest like a splinter. She could have bankrupted him. Well, not bankrupted, but she could have taken enough to hurt. Instead, she'd taken only what she'd considered rightfully hers. Phone? Disconnected. New number. Burner, probably. She left the iPhone you bought her on the kitchen counter. Dante found it this morning when he went to the penthouse. Lorenzo closed his eyes. Of course she had. That phone had a tracker. She'd known. Credit cards? Canceled. All of them. She's off grid, boss. No one goes completely off grid, Lorenzo said. She has friends, family. Her sister's in Seattle, married to that tech guy. I already made contact. Casual, like we were checking in. Emily hasn't heard from her. Seemed genuine. Isabella's sister. Lorenzo had met her twice, maybe 3 times. Emily had never approved of him, made that clear with every tight smile and short conversation. But blood was blood. What about her mother? Marco shifted uncomfortably. Dead 6 years ago. Cancer. You sent flowers to the funeral. Had he? Lorenzo barely remembered. That was the year they'd expanded into New York, the year of the Russo conflict that had nearly sparked a full war. Isabella had gone to Florida for 2 weeks. He remembered that part, the apartment feeling empty without her, and come back quieter, sadder. He'd asked if she was okay. She'd said yes. He'd believed her because believing was easier than dealing with emotional complexity during a territorial expansion. Friends then, Lorenzo said. She had friends. That book club she went to. Disbanded 8 months ago. Marco consulted his notes. According to the woman who ran it, Isabella stopped coming around last summer. Said she seemed distant, but didn't elaborate. 8 months. What had happened 8 months ago? Lorenzo tried to remember. August. He'd been in Miami for 3 weeks negotiating the port deal. Before that, the thing with the Colombians. After that, the federal investigation they'd had to manage. His life was a blur of territories and threats, an endless game of chess played with human pieces. Where had Isabella been in all of that? Waiting. Always waiting. Keep looking, Lorenzo said. Check hotels, rental agreements, anything under her name or her maiden name. Already on it. Marco hesitated. Boss, can I ask you something? Lorenzo gestured for him to continue. When's the last time you two talked? I mean, really talked. The question hit harder than it should have. Lorenzo thought back. Conversations about dinner reservations, brief exchanges about dry cleaning and calendar conflicts. That thing last month when she'd asked about his mother's birthday, and he'd forgotten entirely. When had they last sat down, looked at each other, and actually communicated? I don't know, Lorenzo admitted. Marco nodded slowly like that confirmed something. She leave any other message besides the letter? No. Then maybe... Marco trailed off, thinking better of whatever he'd been about to say. Finish it. Maybe she meant what she wrote. Maybe this isn't about you finding her. It's about her being gone. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. I don't accept that. With respect, boss, I don't think she's asking for your acceptance. 3 days passed. Then a week. Marco's contacts turned up nothing. Isabella Vieri had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. Lorenzo threw himself into work. The Calabrese agreement came through. He expanded operations into Detroit, resolved a dispute with the Russians that could have gotten messy. Business as usual, except nothing felt usual. He came home to the empty penthouse every night. Sometimes he'd pour himself whiskey, 30-year Macallan, and sit in the dark living room trying to figure out where he'd gone wrong. The answer should have been obvious. He knew that. But Lorenzo had spent 42 years learning to compartmentalize, to separate personal from professional, to lock away anything that made him vulnerable. Isabella had been his one weakness, and he'd treated her like a strength, something solid and permanent, requiring no maintenance. 2 weeks after she left, Lorenzo found himself standing in her empty office. The room still smelled faintly of her perfume, Chanel No. 5. the same scent his mother had worn. He'd bought Isabella a bottle every Christmas, wrapped in gold paper, a tradition that had started their first year together and continued mechanically ever since. Had she even liked it? Or had she just worn it because he expected her to? He'd never asked. The desk drawers were empty, but when Lorenzo opened the bottom one, he found something, a sketch pad, shoved in the back, easily missed. He pulled it out, surprised by its weight. Isabella's work. Page after page of drawings in charcoal and pencil. Cityscapes, portraits of people he didn't recognize, abstract shapes that suggested emotion more than form, and toward the back, self-portraits. Lorenzo sat on the floor, the sketchbook in his lap, and studied them. In the first few, Isabella looked young, 23 maybe, around when they'd met. Her eyes held light. Her smile reached all the way. The portraits progressed chronologically, he realized. He could see their life together mapped in the gradual dimming of her expression. Still beautiful. Isabella had always been beautiful, but emptier. More hollow. The last portrait stopped him cold. She'd drawn herself from the side, sitting at this very desk, staring out the window. But she'd sketched herself as translucent, ghost-like, barely there. In the window's reflection, she'd drawn Chicago's skyline. Solid, dark, overwhelming. She'd dated it 6 months ago. 6 months she'd been planning this. Half a year of sketching her own disappearance while he'd been busy expanding his empire. Lorenzo's phone rang. Marco. Found something, his second said without preamble. She filed for divorce. Papers came to the club today. What? Lawyer out of Boston served them. Clean, simple, no-fault divorce. She's not asking for anything except her freedom. Lorenzo stood, leaving the sketchbook on the floor. Boston? She's in Boston. Lawyers in Boston. Doesn't mean she is. Could have hired them remotely. But boss, Marco paused. You might want to look at the papers. There's a clause. What clause? She's requesting no contact. Not through lawyers, not through intermediaries. She wants a complete separation. She doesn't get to decide that. Actually, Marco said carefully, legally, she does. You can contest it, but then I'll contest it. Silence on the other end. Then, is that what you want? A legal battle? Making her testify about why she left? Lorenzo hadn't thought that far ahead. The image of Isabella on a witness stand, forced to catalog his failures in front of strangers and court reporters, made his stomach turn. I'll call you back, he said, and hung up. The divorce papers arrived by courier that afternoon. Lorenzo read them in his office, the door locked, the club silent around him. She wanted nothing. Not the penthouse, not the car he'd bought her, not the beach house in Sardinia or the investment accounts or any of the assets they'd accumulated together, just out. There was a personal note clipped to the legal documents. Not from Isabella, from her lawyer. Professional, courteous, explaining that his client wished to make this as painless as possible and requested his cooperation in finalizing matters quickly. Painless. As if 12 years of marriage could be dissolved painlessly. Lorenzo picked up his phone, started to call Marco, then stopped. What would he say? Find her anyway? Force a confrontation? Make her explain herself to his satisfaction? He thought about the self-portrait. Isabella fading away while the city, his city, loomed solid behind her. He thought about the letter. This is simply what happens when you mistake patience for permission. He thought about coming home at 4 a.m. for 12 years and expecting her to be waiting. Not because she wanted to, but because he'd never considered she might not. Lorenzo set his phone down and picked up a pen. He could fight this. He had lawyers who could drag the proceedings out for years. He had resources to find her anywhere she'd gone. He had power she couldn't match. But what would he be fighting for? The right to keep someone who'd already left? The satisfaction of forcing her back into a life that had slowly erased her? His hand hovered over the signature line. 3 weeks after Isabella left, Lorenzo stood in front of the bathroom mirror at 5 a.m. Couldn't sleep, might as well get ready for another day. He looked the same as always, sharp suit, clean shave, eyes that could stare down anyone stupid enough to challenge him. But something had shifted. Some certainty he'd carried his entire adult life had cracked. He thought about calling Viviana, his mistress for the past 8 months, Sleek, sophisticated, a gallery owner who understood his world without being part of it. Their arrangement had been perfect, excitement without complication, passion without expectation. He'd been with her the night Isabella left. Actually, not with her. At her apartment, yes, but Viviana had been in New York for an art fair. She'd given him a key months ago, suggested he use her place when he needed to decompress. He'd gone there after the Calabrese meeting, planning to sleep a few hours before heading home. Instead, he'd found evidence of another man. Cologne in the bathroom, unfamiliar clothes in the closet. Confirmation of what he'd suspected, but ignored. Viviana wasn't exclusive to him. The discovery should have bothered him. Instead, he'd felt nothing, just a vague sense of irony. The man who'd built an empire on loyalty, cuckolded by his mistress. He'd gone home early because of it. 4 a.m. instead of 7, and found Isabella gone. Lorenzo looked at his phone, Viviana's number right there. She'd called several times since Isabella left, messages asking if he was okay, if he wanted company. The kind of attention he'd once found flattering. Now it felt hollow. He deleted her number. Urs. Marco found him at the club that afternoon reviewing shipment manifests that required his approval. Legitimate business mixed with less legitimate business. Lorenzo's specialty was making it all look the same on paper. The lawyer called again, Marco said, asking about the divorce papers, whether you've made a decision. Lorenzo didn't look up from the manifests. Tell them I'll sign. Marco's surprise was evident in his silence. Then, you sure, boss? Do I look unsure? You look like a man who hasn't slept in 3 weeks. Fair assessment. Lorenzo set down his pen and rubbed his eyes. She doesn't want to be found, Marco. She doesn't want my money or my properties or anything except out. Fighting that makes me the villain. You're already the villain to most people, but not to her, not yet. Lorenzo picked up the pen again. Bring me the papers. I'll sign them tonight. There's one more thing, Marco said carefully. I found her. Lorenzo's head snapped up. What? Boston. Small apartment in Back Bay, registered under her maiden name. Art studio 3 blocks from her place. She's teaching classes twice a week. Living quiet. The information should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like violation. How long have you known? Since yesterday. Wasn't sure if I should tell you, considering... Marco gestured at nothing, meaning everything. Lorenzo stood, walked to the window. His club sat in the heart of territory he'd controlled for 20 years. Outside, his city moved at his command. Shipments diverted, businesses protected, justice administered according to his code. But none of that power could bring Isabella back. Destroy the information, Lorenzo said. Boss, destroy it. Address, phone, all of it. She wanted to disappear. Let her. Marco nodded slowly. And the papers? Bring them. I'll sign them tonight. Achado. The divorce papers sat on Lorenzo's desk for 2 hours before he actually picked up the pen. Marco had left him alone in the office, closed the door, told the crew not to disturb him. Lorenzo read through the documents one more time. Legal language, cold and precise, reducing 12 years to clauses and provisions. No mention of the night they met at that gallery opening, Isabella in a red dress, laughing at something her friend said. No acknowledgement of their honeymoon in Paris, making love in that hotel room while rain drummed against the windows. No record of the quiet mornings, the Sunday breakfasts, the 1,000 small moments that had built a life. Just out. He signed his name on the designated line. Lorenzo Vieri, his signature unchanged since he was 25 and signing his first territory agreement. The same man, supposedly. But he wasn't. Something had broken these past 3 weeks, some illusion of control he'd maintained for decades. He'd always believed that power was absolute, that if you had enough of it, nothing could touch you, nothing could leave you. Isabella had proven him wrong. The pen stayed in his hand. He stared at his signature, wondering if she'd feel relief when her lawyer told her it was done. Wondering if she'd think of him at all, or if she'd already moved on completely. Probably the latter. That's what the letter had said, wasn't it? This isn't about geography, meaning she'd left him long before she'd physically walked out. He just hadn't noticed. Lorenzo gathered the papers, slid them into the envelope Marco had provided. He'd courier them to the Boston lawyer tomorrow. End this cleanly. But tonight, he allowed himself one final moment of what if. What if he'd come home at reasonable hours? What if he'd asked about her art instead of just funding whatever supplies she wanted? What if he'd noticed her fading instead of assuming her presence was permanent? What if he'd loved her better? The questions had no answers. Or rather, they had one answer, and it was sitting in his hands. Signed divorce papers, the legal end of everything they'd been. Lorenzo stood, walked to his safe, and placed the envelope inside. Tomorrow, he'd send it. Tonight, he'd sit with the weight of his failure. The club was quiet around him. Outside, Chicago gleamed in the darkness, his empire stretching in all directions. Territory, money, power, everything he'd worked for, everything he'd built. And none of it mattered, because the one thing he'd actually wanted had slipped through his fingers while he was busy conquering everything else. Lorenzo poured himself whiskey, sat in the darkness of his office, and finally, for the first time in 20 years, let himself feel the full weight of loss. The next morning, Marco found the envelope on his desk with a note. Send this to Boston. It's done. And it was. The papers went out the next afternoon. Marco handled it personally, handed them to a courier service that specialized in discretion. Lorenzo watched from his office window as the car disappeared into Chicago traffic, carrying the legal dissolution of his marriage to some lawyer in Boston who'd never met him and probably thought he was a monster. Maybe he was. He turned back to his desk where a new problem waited. The Moretti family pushing into his South Side operations, testing boundaries, seeing if Lorenzo's recent distraction had made him weak. It hadn't. He made 3 phone calls, moved some pieces, and by evening the Morettis had backed off with their tails between their legs and a new understanding of where the lines were drawn. Business as usual, except nothing felt usual anymore. Boss? Dante knocked on the open door, one of the younger guys, good with computers and surveillance. Got the quarterly reports you wanted. Lorenzo waved him in. Dante set down a folder, hesitated. Something else? It's just, we heard about Mrs. Vieri. The guys wanted me to say, we're sorry. She was always good to us. That caught Lorenzo off guard. He looked at Dante, 26 years old, ambitious but still green. What do you mean, good to you? She remembered our names, birthdays. When Tommy's kid was sick last year, she sent flowers to the hospital. Little things, you know? Made us feel like people instead of just... He trailed off, realizing maybe he shouldn't finish that sentence. Instead of just what? Dante shifted his weight. Nothing, boss. Just, she was nice, that's all. After he left, Lorenzo sat with that. Isabella remembering his crew's birthdays while he barely remembered their first names, sending flowers to sick children while he was busy calculating profit margins and territory splits. Who had he married? And more importantly, who had he failed to notice for 12 years? His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Lorenzo almost ignored it, then answered. Mr. Vieri? A woman's voice, professional, careful. This is Catherine Walsh. I'm representing your wife in the divorce proceedings. Ex-wife, technically, once the papers were processed. But Lorenzo didn't correct her. The papers were sent. Yes, we received them. Thank you for your cooperation. I'm calling to confirm a few final details. The settlement division, you agreed to everything? She asked for nothing. I gave her nothing. Seems straightforward. A pause. Mr. Vieri, I should clarify. Your wife is entitled to half of all marital assets acquired during your marriage. That's substantial. She's choosing not to pursue that, but I'm legally obligated to ensure she understands. She understands, Lorenzo cut in. Isabella is smarter than both of us. If she doesn't want my money, she has her reasons. Another pause, longer. Then, may I speak candidly? You're a lawyer. I didn't think you knew how. A small laugh. Fair enough. Mr. Vieri, I've handled dozens of divorces. Usually when someone walks away from significant assets, it's because they're afraid or being coerced. But your wife, Catherine Walsh chose her words carefully. She's the most certain client I've ever had. She knows exactly what she's doing and why. I just wanted you to know that. Why are you telling me this? Because most of my clients spend months trying to figure out if they made the right choice. Your wife has no doubts. None. I thought you should understand that. The call ended shortly after. Lorenzo sat in the gathering darkness of his office, turning the lawyer's words over in his mind. No doubts. Isabella had walked away from millions of dollars and 12 years of marriage with absolute certainty. While he sat here signing papers he didn't want to sign, sending couriers to lawyers in cities where he had no power. For the first time in his adult life, Lorenzo Vieri felt completely outmaneuvered. Well, 2 months crawled by. Spring turned to early summer. Lorenzo's empire expanded, a new arrangement with the unions, a lucrative deal moving pharmaceuticals through the port, a judge in his pocket who'd been holdout finally coming around after the right pressure was applied. Money flowed, power consolidated. Everything he touched turned to profit, and he felt nothing. Marco noticed, of course. Marco noticed everything. "You're going to work yourself to death," he said one night, finding Lorenzo at the club at midnight, reviewing contracts that could have waited until morning. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You look like hell. You're sleeping maybe 3 hours a night, and you snapped at Paulie yesterday for nothing." Paulie screwed up the Newark shipment. "By 15 minutes. 15. You threatened to break his legs over 15 minutes. Marco sat down across from Lorenzo, his expression serious. "This isn't you, boss. You're controlled. You don't lose your temper over minor delays." Lorenzo set down his pen. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to admit this is about her." "It's not. It's been 2 months. The divorce is finalized. She's gone. And you're acting like a man who lost the only thing that mattered." Marco leaned forward. "Boss, I've known you 20 years. I've seen you take bullets, bury friends, stare down feds who had dead bang cases. Never seen you like this." "Like what?" "Lost." The word hit harder than it should have. Lorenzo stood, walked to the window. Outside, the neighborhood slept under his protection. Buildings he owned, businesses he controlled, people who owed him their safety. "I had everything planned," he said quietly. "Empire built, succession lined up, enough money to last 3 lifetimes. And I thought—" He stopped, not sure how to finish. Marco waited. "I thought she'd always be there. At the end of everything, when it was all over, Isabella would be there. That was the point, wasn't it? Build something so big, so secure, that we'd never have to worry, never be vulnerable. And instead she left because you were never there." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "I was providing for her, protecting her. She didn't need providing for, boss. She needed you." Marco stood. "And I'm going to say something I probably shouldn't because I've been holding it for 2 months and it needs saying." "Then say it. You treated her like a possession, beautiful thing you owned, kept safe, took for granted. And when she left, you tried to handle it like a business problem, find her, negotiate, control the outcome. But people aren't territory, boss. You can't conquer them into staying." Silence filled the office. Outside, a car alarm went off, was quickly silenced. Someone handling a problem, keeping the neighborhood quiet. Lorenzo had built this, a machine that ran smoothly, violently, efficiently, a world where his word was law and nothing happened without his approval, except Isabella leaving. That had happened without his approval, without his permission, without even his awareness until it was done. "The guys have been talking," Marco continued. "They're worried. You're making reckless calls, taking unnecessary risks. Last week, that thing with the Morettis, you went in person. Since when do you go in person to a street-level negotiation?" "I wanted to make a point." "You wanted to hurt somebody." Marco's voice was gentle but firm. "And that's not how you operate. You're smart, strategic. Not this, whatever this is." Lorenzo turned from the window. "What do you suggest?" "Talk to someone. Not me, not the crew. Someone who can help you process." "A therapist?" Lorenzo almost laughed. "You want me to lie on a couch and talk about my feelings to some stranger? I want you to deal with this before it gets you killed. You're distracted, boss. And in our business, distracted gets you dead." The conversation with Marco stuck. Not that Lorenzo would actually see a therapist. That was absurd, dangerous even. In his world, weakness was blood in the water. The families were always watching, always looking for an opening. But Marco was right about the recklessness. Lorenzo could feel it in himself, this edge he hadn't had before. A willingness to push confrontations further, to take chances he'd normally avoid. Like tonight, standing in a warehouse on the south side, facing down Johnny Moretti and 6 of his guys. The smart play would have been to send Marco or Dante. Instead, Lorenzo had come himself, walked right into their territory with only 2 of his own men. You got some balls coming here, Johnny said. Mid-30s, trying too hard to look tough in a leather jacket that probably cost more than his car. This is our neighborhood now. This is my neighborhood, Lorenzo corrected. Has been for 15 years. You've been here 6 weeks and already you're confused about how things work. Johnny's hand drifted toward his waistband. Lorenzo's guys tensed, but Lorenzo held up a hand, stopping them. You really want to pull that gun? Lorenzo asked. His voice was calm, almost bored. Think about the next 5 minutes. You shoot me, my guys shoot you, your guys shoot them. Everyone dies. And for what? Because you wanted to move coke through my territory without paying tribute? We don't need your permission. Yeah, you do. Lorenzo took a step forward. Johnny's guys shifted nervously, but their boss held his ground. You know what happened to the last crew that tried to operate independent in my territory? Ancient history. 6 months ago, the Calabrese family. You know why you haven't heard from them? Lorenzo smiled, but there was nothing friendly in it. Because they're smart. They saw the math, made the right choice, and now they're making money under my protection instead of dying under their pride. We're not them. No, you're younger and dumber, which is worse. Lorenzo was close enough now to see sweat on Johnny's forehead despite the cool warehouse air. But I'm going to give you the same chance I gave them. Work with me or disappear, your choice. You have 24 hours. He turned and walked away. Every instinct screamed that this was stupid, that turning his back on armed men who hated him was suicide. But Lorenzo had learned long ago that projecting absolute confidence often worked better than actual firepower. His guys followed. They made it to the car without gunfire, which Lorenzo counted as a victory, however small. That was insane, Bobby muttered, starting the engine. That was necessary, Lorenzo corrected. But his hands were shaking slightly as he lit a cigarette. When had that started again? He'd quit smoking 5 years ago because Isabella hated it. Isabella, who was gone. Who'd left him 2 months ago and probably hadn't thought about him since, while he was still arranging his entire life around her absence. The Morettis came around the next afternoon. Johnny showed up at the club with an envelope full of cash and an apology that probably tasted like poison coming out. Smart choice, Lorenzo said, accepting the tribute. You'll make more working with me than against me. After they left, Marco raised an eyebrow. Surprised they folded that fast. Fear is a powerful motivator, so is having nothing to lose. Marco studied him. Which category are you in these days, boss? Lorenzo didn't answer. He wasn't sure himself anymore. That evening, he went home to the penthouse for the first time in a week. He'd been sleeping at the club mostly, or at the warehouse office, anywhere that didn't echo with Isabella's absence. But tonight felt different, quieter inside his own head. The apartment smelled stale. His housekeeper came twice a week, kept everything clean, but the space had that unlived-in quality of a hotel room. Lorenzo opened windows, let the Chicago summer air rush in. Her sketchbook was still in the office, right where he'd left it on the floor. He picked it up, flipped through the drawings again. Near the back, he found something he'd missed before. A portrait of him. Lorenzo sitting at this very table, phone to his ear, wine glass in front of him. The detail was incredible. She'd captured everything. The tiredness around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, even the specific way he held his phone tilted slightly away from his ear because the speaker was too loud. When had she drawn this? He tried to remember sitting there while she sketched, but couldn't. She must have done it from memory, or from observation, watching him when he wasn't paying attention. How many hours had she spent watching him while he looked at everything else? His phone rang. Viviana. He'd deleted her number, but apparently she hadn't gotten the message. Lorenzo stared at the screen, watching it ring. Once upon a time, 3 months ago maybe, he would have answered, would have invited her over, lost himself in the uncomplicated physicality of their arrangement. Now the idea exhausted him. He let it go to voicemail, then blocked the number entirely. The evening stretched ahead, empty. Lorenzo poured wine, something expensive Isabella had picked out, a Barolo from a vineyard she'd read about, and sat on the balcony watching the city lights. His phone buzzed again. Different number. Marco. Yeah? Got a situation. The feds picked up Tony Bernardo this afternoon. He's been flipped, boss, wearing a wire for 3 months. Lorenzo's mind shifted immediately into crisis mode. Tony was mid-level, knew enough to hurt them, but not enough to destroy the whole operation. Still dangerous. Who's he talk to? We're pulling transcripts now, but boss, you should know, he was at the warehouse last week when you met with the Colombians, and at the club when you took that call from the Detroit crew. Incriminating. Potentially very incriminating. Where is he now? Federal holding. We're not getting to him in there. Then we need to know exactly what he gave them. Pull everyone who's been in contact with Tony in the last 3 months. Review all conversations, all deals. I want to know our exposure by morning. On it. Marco paused. Boss, this could be big. I know. After hanging up, Lorenzo sat very still, calculating. Tony could testify about the Colombian deal, the Detroit expansion, maybe even the Moretti situation. Add that to whatever else the feds had been building, and they might actually have a case, a real case. Not the flimsy circumstantial stuff they usually threw at him, but actual evidence. He should have been panicking, should have been calling lawyers, preparing defenses, moving assets. Instead, Lorenzo felt almost nothing, just a distant recognition that his empire might be crumbling, and he couldn't find the energy to care. Marco was right. He was distracted, and distracted got you dead, or in this case, federally indicted. The next 72 hours blurred into a mess of emergency meetings, lawyer consultations, and damage control. Tony had given the feds enough to hurt them, but not enough to destroy them. Careful management, strategic admissions, aggressive legal maneuvering, Lorenzo's team was the best money could buy. By the end of the week, they had a plan. Not perfect, but workable. Some charges they'd fight, others they'd negotiate down. Tony himself would have an unfortunate accident in protective custody, nothing fatal, just scary enough to make him reconsider his cooperation. We'll get through this, Marco said with confidence. We've survived worse. Maybe. But Lorenzo found himself wondering if surviving was enough anymore. That night, unable to sleep, he ended up at Viviana's gallery. The place was closed, dark, but Lorenzo still had the key she'd given him months ago. He should have returned it, probably. Added it to the list of things he should have done but hadn't. Inside, the gallery smelled like paint and expensive wine. Viviana's latest exhibition lined the walls, abstract pieces, bold colors, the kind of art wealthy people bought to prove they had culture. Isabella's work had been different, more personal, more raw. He remembered visiting her studio once, early in their marriage. She'd been nervous showing him her paintings, worried he wouldn't understand them. He hadn't, not really. But he'd pretended to, bought her fancy supplies, told her she was talented, then promptly forgotten about it because he had territories to manage and rivals to crush. Lorenzo? He turned. Viviana stood in the doorway, wrapped in a silk robe, her hair perfect even at midnight. She must have gotten an alert when he used the key. What are you doing here? Good question. Lorenzo looked around the gallery, trying to find an answer. I don't know. She approached carefully, like he was a dangerous animal that might spook. I heard about the divorce. I'm sorry. Are you? No, she admitted. But it seemed like the thing to say. At least she was honest. Lorenzo appreciated that, even if he appreciated nothing else about this situation. We should talk, Viviana said, gesturing to her office in the back. There are things we need to discuss. In her office, expensive scotch came out. They sat across from each other, the desk between them like a negotiating table. I'm seeing someone, Viviana said without preamble. Seriously seeing someone. Have been for a while. I know. You know? She looked surprised. Since when? Since always. I'm not an idiot, Viviana. Then why did I keep seeing you? Lorenzo finished his scotch, poured another. Because it was easy. Because you didn't expect anything from me except money and discretion, both of which I have in abundance. She absorbed that. And now? Now I'm tired of easy. That's very enlightened of you. What brought on this revelation? The divorce? Lorenzo thought about the question. When had he realized that easy wasn't enough? Maybe when he read Isabella's letter. Maybe when he saw her ghost-like self-portrait. Maybe when he signed divorce papers in the darkness of his office and felt his entire world shift. I used to think control was everything, he said. Control the territory, control the money, control the people around you. Make yourself so powerful that nothing could touch you. That's not wrong. Control is important. It's empty. The words came out harder than he intended. I controlled everything in my life except the one thing that mattered. My wife walked out of a marriage I thought was solid, and I never saw it coming because I was too busy maintaining control over everything else. Viviana set down her glass. Lorenzo, can I tell you something? And you won't take it the wrong way? Does it matter if I do? Isabella leaving is the best thing that ever happened to you. He stared at her. Excuse me? You heard me. You were sleepwalking through your life, empire on autopilot, wife at home waiting, mistress on the side for excitement. Everything exactly where you wanted it, nothing requiring any actual emotional investment. She leaned forward. Isabella leaving forced you to wake up, to feel something. Even if that something is misery, at least it's real. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Lorenzo, I've known you 8 months. In that time, have you ever once talked about your wife with actual emotion? Love, anger, frustration, anything? He tried to remember. Conversations with Viviana had been superficial by design. Surface-level complaints about work, about the pressures of his position, about needing an escape. Never about Isabella, because talking about Isabella would have required acknowledging she was real, that his marriage was real, that he was betraying someone who mattered. Easier to compartmentalize. Easier to keep everything in neat boxes that never touched. She was my wife, Lorenzo said, as if that explained everything. She was your security blanket, something stable and permanent while you played with fire everywhere else. Viviana's voice was gentle but cutting. And now she's gone, and you're finally dealing with the fact that you actually cared about her. Past tense, Lorenzo, because you can't care about someone you ignore for 12 years and expect them to wait forever. Lorenzo left the gallery with Viviana's words echoing in his head. She was wrong, had to be wrong. He'd loved Isabella, provided for her, protected her, given her everything money could buy, everything except himself. The thought followed him home, into the empty penthouse, through another sleepless night. He found himself in Isabella's office again, surrounded by the evidence of the woman he'd married and failed to know. Her sketchbook, a book of poetry on the shelf, Byron, well-worn, pages dog-eared, a dried flower pressed between 2 pieces of glass, the kind of sentimental thing Lorenzo would have thrown away but Isabella had kept. He didn't even know where the flower was from. Morning came gray and humid, the kind of Chicago summer day that promised storms. Lorenzo showered, dressed, went through the motions of being Lorenzo Vieri, crime boss, empire builder, man in control. But the mask was slipping. He could feel it in the way his hands shook sometimes when he was alone, in the way he'd lost 10 pounds without trying, in the way violence had started feeling less like business and more like therapy. Marco had been right. He was lost. And the worst part was, even if he found himself again, Isabella would still be gone. Teaching art classes in Boston, living a life that didn't include him, probably happier than she'd been in years. His phone buzzed. The lawyer, Catherine Walsh. Mr. Vieri, the divorce is finalized. All documents have been processed and filed with the court. Your marriage to Isabella Moretti is legally dissolved. Moretti, her maiden name. She'd taken it back, erased Vieri from her identity as completely as she'd erased herself from his apartment. Thank you for calling, Lorenzo heard himself say. There's one more thing. My client asked me to return something to you. What? I'm not sure. She said you'd understand. A package will arrive at your club this afternoon. The package came at 3. Marco brought it to Lorenzo's office, a small box wrapped in plain brown paper, Isabella's handwriting on the label. Lorenzo opened it carefully, as if it might explode. Inside, her wedding ring. The 5-carat diamond he'd spent a fortune on, custom designed from a jeweler in Amsterdam. Isabella had worn it for 12 years without complaint, even though Lorenzo had later learned she preferred simpler jewelry. No note, no explanation, just the ring, returned like a receipt from a transaction gone bad. Lorenzo held it up to the light, watching it catch fire from the window, a symbol of promises made and broken, of a marriage that had looked perfect from the outside while rotting from within. He should have felt something, anger, sadness, regret, anything. Instead, he felt the same nothing that had been following him for months, the same emptiness that no amount of money or power or violence could fill. Marco appeared in his doorway. Boss? The lawyers want to discuss the Tony situation. They need decisions. Tell them I'll call back. It's urgent. I don't care. Lorenzo set down the ring. Everything is urgent, Marco. Everything is always urgent, and none of it matters. Boss, you're not making sense. For the first time in months, I'm making perfect sense. Lorenzo stood. I built an empire, controlled a city, made myself untouchable. And the only thing I actually wanted walked away because I was too busy being untouchable to notice she was drowning. Marco stepped into the office, closed the door. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't know who I am anymore. The man I was 6 months ago, he was certain, confident, clear about his priorities. That man is gone, and I have no idea who replaced him. You're grieving, boss. That's normal after a divorce. This isn't grief, it's recognition. Lorenzo looked at the ring again. I spent 42 years becoming Lorenzo Vieri. Built a reputation, an empire, a life. But I never stopped to ask if Lorenzo Vieri was worth becoming. Silence hung between them. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, the promised storm finally arriving. What do you need? Marco asked quietly. I don't know. Time, maybe. Space to figure out who I'm supposed to be now that everything I thought I knew turned out to be wrong. Take it. The crew can handle things for a while. You've got good people, boss. Let them do their jobs. Lorenzo wanted to argue, to say he couldn't afford to step back, that the empire would crumble without him. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe he'd built something that required constant maintenance precisely so he'd never have to stop and think about anything else. Set up the meetings with the lawyers, he said finally. Handle the Tony situation however you think best. I trust your judgment. Marco looked surprised. Lorenzo rarely delegated real authority, always insisted on making final calls himself. Control. Always control. You sure? No. But do it anyway. After Marco left, Lorenzo sat alone with the ring and the gathering storm. Rain began hitting the windows in sheets, turning the city into abstract impressions of light and water. He thought about Isabella in Boston, probably dry in her little apartment, maybe teaching a class right now, showing students how to see light and shadow, how to capture feeling on canvas. Had she ever been this happy with him? Had he ever given her space to be herself instead of just Mrs. Vieri, the Mafia boss's decorative wife? The answer sat in his palm, 5 carats of compressed carbon that had meant everything once and now meant nothing at all. Lorenzo put the ring in his safe that night, next to documents and cash and a gun he'd carried for 20 years but never fired. The safe held everything valuable in his life, apparently. Everything except the one thing that had actually mattered. Sleep didn't come. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Chicago's night sounds filter through the windows. Sirens, car horns, the distant thud of bass from some club 40 floors below. The soundtrack of his empire, playing on without him. Around 3 a.m., his phone lit up. Not a call, a text from a number he didn't recognize. Stop looking for me. I mean it. His heart kicked. He sat up, typed back immediately. I'm not looking for you. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Your guy was at my building last week. Tell him to stop. Lorenzo's jaw clenched. Marco swore he'd destroyed the information about Isabella's location. Apparently someone hadn't gotten the memo. I'll handle it. I'm sorry. The dots danced for a long time before her response came. You're always sorry after, never before. That hit like a physical blow. Lorenzo stared at the words, trying to formulate a response that wasn't defensive, wasn't an excuse, wasn't just more of the same patterns that had driven her away. You're right. Nothing. No dots, no response. She'd said what she needed to say and was done. Classic Isabella. Direct, efficient, gone before he could react. Lorenzo got up, threw on clothes, and drove to Marco's house in the suburbs. Respectable neighborhood, 2-story colonial, the kind of place that hid what Marco actually did for a living. He rang the doorbell at 3:30 in the morning and waited. Marco answered in a bathrobe, gun in hand, relaxing when he saw Lorenzo. Boss, what the hell? Who's watching Isabella? Marco's face went carefully blank. Nobody. I destroyed... Don't lie to me. She just texted. Someone was at her building last week. A long silence. Then Marco sighed and stepped aside. Come in. Inside the house was tastefully decorated. Marco's wife had good instincts. Family photos lined the hallway. Normal life, or at least the appearance of it. They sat in the kitchen. Marco made coffee neither of them wanted. Sal didn't get the message, Marco admitted. He's old school, thought he was doing you a favor, keeping tabs, making sure she was safe. Safe from what? Me? Safe from anyone. She's still the boss's wife, ex-wife, and some people might see her as leverage. Marco set down mugs. I shut it down when I found out, last week. Told Sal if he went near Boston again, I'd break his legs myself. Lorenzo rubbed his face. She thinks I sent him. Did you tell her you didn't? Yeah, don't think she believed me. Marco added sugar to his coffee, stirred slowly. Boss, can I ask you something? What's the endgame here? There is no endgame. She left. It's over. Then why do you look like someone died every time her name comes up? Why are you sitting in my kitchen at 4 a.m. because she sent you a text? Marco leaned forward. You want her back. Doesn't matter what I want. She made her choice. That's not an answer. Lorenzo picked up his mug, set it down without drinking. The coffee smelled bitter, overbrewed, like everything else in his life lately. I want her back, he admitted. I want to wake up and have the last 6 months be a nightmare. I want to rewind 12 years and do everything differently. I want... He stopped, the words catching in his throat. I want things I can't have, so it doesn't matter. It matters because you're half alive right now. The crew sees it. I see it. You're going through motions, making decisions, but you're not here. Not really. I'm handling business. You're handling business like a man with a death wish. Last month with the Morettis? That wasn't strategy. That was suicide with extra steps. Marco's voice was firm. You need to either fix this or move on. But this middle ground where you're drowning in her absence while pretending you're fine, that's going to get you killed. Lorenzo knew he was right. The reckless calls, the sleepless nights, the way he'd stopped caring about basic self-preservation, all of it pointed to a man circling the drain. How do I move on from 12 years? Same way everyone else does. One day at a time. Therapy, maybe. Dating, eventually. Finding out who you are when you're not half of a marriage. Marco paused. Or you figure out if there's any way to fix it. She doesn't want to fix it. She wants me gone from her life completely. Then you respect that. And you rebuild yourself anyway, because the alternative is what you're doing now, which isn't working. Lorenzo left Marco's house as dawn was breaking. Pink light stretched across suburban lawns, cars warming up in driveways, people starting their normal days. He drove back to the city feeling untethered, like he was watching someone else's life through a windshield. At the penthouse, he opened his laptop and did something he'd been avoiding for months. He searched for Isabella. Not her address or phone number. He'd promised to stop, and he meant it. But her art studio had a website. Classes offered, student galleries, a brief bio that made no mention of Chicago or marriage, or the 12 years she'd spent as Mrs. Vieri. Isabella Moretti teaches watercolor and figure drawing in Boston's Back Bay. Her work focuses on urban landscapes and the human form, exploring themes of presence and absence in contemporary life. Presence and absence. Lorenzo wondered if that was about him, about their marriage. Probably. Everything in his life seemed to circle back to what he'd lost. Her student gallery showed amateur work, still lifes, portraits, landscapes that ranged from tentative to confident. At the bottom, a note. Classes forming for fall session. Beginners welcome. He closed the laptop before he could do something stupid like sign up. The Tony situation resolved itself 2 weeks later. Not through violence or intimidation, but through Tony's own stupidity. He got caught lying to his federal handlers, contradicted his own testimony, and suddenly the case the prosecutors were building fell apart like wet cardboard. We're clear, the lawyer said over the phone. They're dropping most charges, pleading down the rest to nothing. You'll pay a fine, do some community service, and that's it, community service. Lorenzo Vieri, crime boss, picking up trash on highway shoulders or serving soup at a shelter. The irony wasn't lost on him. Fine. Whatever you worked out, I'll do it. The lawyer sounded surprised. You're not going to fight it? What's the point? They want me to pretend I'm reformed? I'll pretend. Cheaper than a trial. After hanging up, Lorenzo sat in his office at the club and felt nothing. 6 months ago, beating a federal case would have been cause for celebration. Champagne, expensive dinner, maybe a weekend in Vegas. Victory. Now it was just another Tuesday. Marco poked his head in. Heard the news. Congratulations, boss. Thanks. We should celebrate. Crew wants to take you out, show appreciation for handling everything. Not tonight. Marco studied him. You know what? Yeah, tonight. You've been locked in this office or the penthouse for weeks. You need to get out. Remind yourself why you do this. I do this because I'm good at it and it pays well. Don't need reminding. Humor me. One night, we'll hit Giovanni's, get some food, few drinks, nothing crazy. Marco wasn't asking anymore. 7 o'clock. Be ready. Bah. Giovanni's was a restaurant Lorenzo owned through 3 shell companies and a cousin's wife's brother. Nice place, upscale Italian, the kind of spot where local politicians and business owners ate alongside people who'd never declare their actual income. The crew had reserved the back room. When Lorenzo arrived, a dozen of his guys stood and applauded. Embarrassing, but he nodded acknowledgement and sat at the head of the table. Wine flowed, steaks arrived, perfectly cooked. Conversation buzzed around him. Talk of the Moretti situation, the Detroit expansion, some new opportunity in Milwaukee that Dante had been researching. Lorenzo participated minimally, let Marco run the discussion. This was good for morale, showing the boss was human, accessible, part of the performance. To Lorenzo, Marco said, raising his glass. Smartest son of a bitch in Chicago. They drank. Lorenzo went through the motions. Halfway through dinner, Sal, the one who'd been watching Isabella, approached the table. Older guy, late 60s, old enough to remember when Lorenzo's father ran things. Boss, can I talk to you? Private? They stepped into the hallway near the bathrooms. Sal looked uncomfortable, kept shifting his weight. I owe you an apology. The thing in Boston, Marco told me you didn't want anyone watching her, and I did it anyway. Thought I was protecting you, but I was out of line. Lorenzo considered him. Sal had been loyal for 40 years, first to Lorenzo's father, then to Lorenzo. Good soldier, followed orders, never asked questions. Why'd you do it? Because... Sal struggled to find words. Because she was good for you, boss. I seen you before her and after her, and you were better with her. Calmer. More human. He looked embarrassed. Thought maybe if I kept eyes on her, made sure she was safe, maybe someday you two could fix things. She doesn't want to fix things. I know. Marco made that clear. Sal met his eyes. But you do. Anyone can see that. And watching you these past months, watching you tear yourself apart, I thought I could help. I was wrong. Lorenzo clapped him on the shoulder. You're a good man, Sal. Misguided, but good. Just no more. She wants distance. We give her distance. Understood, boss. Back at the table, the celebration had gotten louder. Someone was telling a story about a botched meeting with the Russians, everyone laughing. Normal crew bonding, the kind of thing that kept everyone loyal when things got hard. Lorenzo watched them and felt like he was behind glass. Present, but separate. Part of the scene, but not in it. His phone buzzed. He checked it reflexively, hoping maybe Isabella had texted again. Instead, Viviana. Heard about the case? Congratulations. Drink sometime? He deleted the message without responding. The evening wound down around 10. Lorenzo shook hands, accepted congratulations, played the role of gracious leader. Then he went home to the empty penthouse and poured himself expensive wine in the dark. Isabella's wedding ring sat in the safe, but he'd taken to keeping her sketchbook on the coffee table. Some nights he'd flip through it, studying her progression from hopeful to hollow, trying to pinpoint exactly when he'd lost her. Tonight, he stopped on a drawing near the middle. Isabella had sketched their bedroom, but empty. Bed made, no personal items, everything sterile. Like a hotel room or a crime scene. She'd dated it 4 years ago. 4 years. She'd been planning her exit for 4 years, or at least feeling absent for that long. While Lorenzo had been oblivious, thinking everything was fine, he'd never been good at reading people's emotional states. In business, you watched for tells, nervous gestures, avoiding eye contact, inconsistent stories, signs someone was lying or scared or about to betray you. But Isabella had never lied. She'd just gone quiet. And Lorenzo had mistaken quiet for contentment, silence for peace. His phone rang. Unknown number. For a second his heart jumped. Maybe Isabella again. But the voice on the other end was male, professional. Mr. Vieri? This is David Chen from the Chicago Tribune. I'm writing a piece about organized crime in Chicago, and I was hoping to get your perspective." Lorenzo's instinct was to hang up, but something made him stay on the line. Maybe exhaustion, maybe the wine, maybe just the bone-deep tiredness of maintaining his image every second of every day. "I don't talk to reporters." "I understand, but I've been researching your organization for 6 months, and I think the story I'm telling is more nuanced than what's usually written about families like yours. I'm interested in the human element." "The human element of organized crime? That's a new angle. Is it? You employ 300 people directly, probably 1,000 indirectly. You provide services the legitimate economy can't or won't. You operate in a space between legal and illegal that most people don't understand." Chen paused. "I'm not trying to make you a hero, but I think there's more to it than the mob boss stereotype." Lorenzo should have hung up, should have called his lawyer, but the wine was good, and the penthouse was empty, and something about Chen's approach intrigued him. "What do you want to know?" "Tell me about your wife." The question blindsided him. "What?" "Isabella Vieri, now Isabella Moretti. You were married 12 years, divorced 6 months ago. In all my research, I couldn't find a single incident involving her. No arrests, no accusations, nothing. She was completely invisible." Papers rustled on Chen's end. "That seems deliberate, like you kept her separate from your business." "Why?" "That's personal. Everything's personal, Mr. Vieri. Your business is built on personal relationships, loyalty, respect, trust. Your marriage was the same, wasn't it? Until it ended." Lorenzo walked to the window, phone pressed to his ear. The city sprawled below, all light and shadow. "You write this article. What happens?" "It gets published, people read it. Maybe it changes some perceptions, maybe it doesn't, but at least it's honest." "Nothing written about me is ever honest." "Then here's your chance. On record, attributed, your actual words." Chen's voice was steady. "Tell me about Isabella. Tell me why you kept her out of your world. And maybe it was the wine, or the exhaustion, or the months of carrying this alone." But Lorenzo started talking. "I kept her out because she deserved better. She married me when I was still building things, when it wasn't clear yet what I'd become. And by the time it was clear, we were already in too deep." He paused. "She was good. Actually good. Kind to people for no reason, remembered birthdays, cared about things that didn't benefit her. Everything I'm not." "You don't think you're good?" "I'm effective. That's different." "But you loved her." Past tense. Chen had used past tense, and he was right. "I loved the idea of her. Beautiful wife waiting at home, proof I could have something normal in my abnormal life. But I didn't love her the way she needed, didn't put in the work, didn't show up, didn't even notice when she started disappearing." Lorenzo's reflection in the window looked tired. "So she left, and I'm standing here 6 months later finally understanding what I lost." Chen was quiet for a moment. "You ever think about reaching out, trying to fix it?" "Every day. But she made herself clear she doesn't want contact, doesn't want me in her life. Respecting that is the only decent thing I can do." "That must be hard, respecting someone's wishes when what you want is the opposite." "Being hard doesn't make it wrong." They talked for another 20 minutes. Chen asked about the business, the community, the economics of what Lorenzo did. Smart questions, thoughtful, not trying to trap him or twist his words. Finally, "I appreciate your time, Mr. Vieri. This will run next month. I'll send you a copy before publication, if you'd like to review it. I trust you'll be fair." "I'll be honest. That's the best I can offer." After hanging up, Lorenzo sat with what he'd done. Talked to a reporter, on record, about Isabella. His lawyers would have heart attacks. Marco would think he'd lost his mind. But it felt good, speaking the truth out loud. Admitting failure without excuse or justification. Just, "I lost her because I didn't do the work." Simple. Terrible. True. The article came out 3 weeks later. Front page of the Sunday Tribune complete with photos, Lorenzo's official headshot from some charity event, and a grainy shot of Isabella leaving her Boston apartment, taken before Sal had been called off. The headline, "The Personal Price of Power, Lorenzo Vieri's Untold Story." Marco brought it to the club, dropped it on Lorenzo's desk. "Have you seen this?" Lorenzo had already read it twice. Chen had kept his word. Honest, nuanced, painting neither a villain nor a hero, but a complicated man who'd built an empire and lost his marriage in the process. The parts about Isabella were accurate, sometimes painfully so. Lorenzo's own words quoted, "I loved the idea of her more than the reality of her. And by the time I realized that, she was gone." "Half the crew thinks you've lost your mind," Marco said. "The other half thinks it's a PR move, make you seem human. And what do you think?" Marco sat down, studied the article. "I think you're trying to process something publicly that should probably be private. But I also think maybe you needed to say it out loud. Get it out of your system." "It's not out of my system. I know, boss. Believe me, I know." The article generated surprising responses. Letters came to the club, some angry, calling him a criminal who didn't deserve sympathy. Others understanding, sharing their own stories of marriages that fell apart while they were busy building careers. One letter caught Lorenzo's attention. Return address in Boston, handwriting he recognized. His hands shook opening it. "Lorenzo, I read the article. I'm not sure why I'm writing this, except that your words deserved a response. You said you loved the idea of me more than the reality. That hurt to read, but it's true. I was a role you cast me in, not a person you knew. And I let you because it was easier than fighting for something else. I don't blame you anymore. That's what I want you to understand. I spent years angry, then years numb, and now I'm just past it. You were who you were. I was who I was. Neither of us was brave enough to ask for more. I'm not coming back. I need you to know that clearly, in case any part of you is still hoping. This isn't a trial separation or a wake-up call. I've built a life here that's mine, and I'm happier than I've been in over a decade. But I also need you to know I forgive you, not because you asked, but because carrying anger was making me less than who I want to be. I hope you find whatever you're looking for. I hope you become someone you can live with. I hope you understand that sometimes love isn't enough. It takes presence, attention, work, all the things neither of us gave. Take care of yourself." Isabella Lorenzo read it 5 times, then a 6th. The forgiveness should have felt like relief, but instead it felt like ending. Final proof that Isabella had moved on completely while he was still circling the same drain of regret and loss. She was happy. Actually happy. And he was sitting in his office at a social club, reading a letter from a woman who'd forgiven him while making it absolutely clear she never wanted to see him again. Marco knocked, entered. "Everything okay?" Lorenzo handed him the letter. Marco read it, his expression carefully neutral. "That's good, right? Closure?" "Is it?" Lorenzo took the letter back. "She forgives me, she's moved on, she's happy. Meanwhile, I'm..." He stopped, not sure how to finish. "Still in love with her?" The words hung in the air. Lorenzo wanted to deny it, but what was the point? "Yeah, still in love with the woman who left me 6 months ago and has made it clear she's never coming back. Pretty pathetic." "Not pathetic. Human." Marco sat down. "Boss, you've spent your whole life being in control. This is the first time something happened that you couldn't fix or manage or control into submission. That's hard for anyone, but especially for you. So what do I do?" "You accept it. You let her go. Not legally. That's already done. But actually, you stop reading her letter 500 times. You stop keeping her sketchbook on your coffee table. You stop defining yourself by what you lost and start figuring out who you are without it." "I don't know who that is." "Then you figure it out. Therapy, travel, taking time away from the business. Whatever it takes to become someone you can stand to be." Lorenzo looked at the letter again. Isabella's careful handwriting, her measured words, her clear boundaries. She'd done the work. Built a new life, found happiness, forgiven him while protecting herself. Everything he should be doing. Instead, he was stuck in the same patterns, the same office, the same empty penthouse. "Set up a meeting with the crew," Lorenzo said. "Leadership meeting. Everyone important." "When?" "Tomorrow. I need to make some changes." The next day, Lorenzo's inner circle gathered at the club. Marco, Dante, Sal, Bobby, 3 others who ran major operations. They filled the back room, curious and slightly nervous. Lorenzo stood at the head of the table. "I'm stepping back." Silence. Then everyone started talking at once. "Boss, what? You can't just... Is this about the article?" Lorenzo held up a hand. Silence fell immediately. Not stepping down, stepping back. Marco will handle day-to-day operations. Major decisions still come through me, but I'm not going to be here every day anymore. Marco looked shocked. Boss, we should discuss this. We're discussing it now. You've been my second for 20 years. You know this business as well as I do. Maybe better because you're not... Lorenzo searched for the right word. Compromised. You can think clearly. Where are you going? Dante asked. Nowhere specific, but I need time to figure some things out. And I can't do that while running an empire that requires my attention every second. The families will see this as weakness, Sal said. They'll push boundaries, test us. Let them. We'll push back. The operation doesn't depend on me being physically present. It depends on the structures we've built, the relationships we maintain. Lorenzo looked around the table. I trust you, all of you. Handle things. Call me for anything major. But the day-to-day? That's on you now. After the meeting, Marco cornered him. You serious about this? Completely. What are you going to do? Lorenzo thought about it. Isabella's letter said I should become someone I can live with. That seems like a good starting point. And how do you do that? No idea. But I know I can't do it here in this office, running the same plays I've been running for 20 years. He met Marco's eyes. I'm 42. My wife left me because I was emotionally absent for 12 years. My business is solid, but built on things that would horrify most people. I drink too much, sleep too little, and the only thing I'm good at is organized crime. That can't be all there is. Marco nodded slowly. How long? As long as it takes. Could be a month, could be 6. I'll stay reachable, but I need space to breathe. Okay, boss, we'll hold things down. Lorenzo spent the next week organizing the transition. Files transferred, contacts shared, protocols established. His crew was professional, competent. They'd be fine without him micromanaging every decision. The penthouse, though, that required different handling. He couldn't sell it. Too many memories, and despite everything, he wasn't ready to erase Isabella completely from his life. But he couldn't stay there either, drowning in her absence every night. He rented a small apartment in Wicker Park, trendy neighborhood, nothing fancy. 1 bedroom, basic furniture, no history. The kind of place where Lorenzo Vieri didn't exist, where he could just be a guy trying to figure his life out. Moving day, he packed 1 suitcase. Clothes, toiletries, basics. Left everything else in the penthouse. The art, the furniture, the accumulated weight of 12 years. Except Isabella's sketchbook. That came with him. And her wedding ring. He didn't know why exactly, just couldn't leave it behind in a safe with guns and money. The new apartment felt wrong the first night. Too quiet, too small, too unfamiliar. Lorenzo sat on the couch, cheap leather, nothing like the custom pieces in the penthouse, and wondered what the hell he was doing. His phone buzzed. Marco. Crew handled the Milwaukee situation. No problems. You good? Yeah. Thanks for checking. That's my job now, apparently. Get some rest, boss. Lorenzo set down the phone and looked around. Blank walls, minimal furniture, a life reduced to essentials. The opposite of everything he'd built. Maybe that was the point. He opened Isabella's sketchbook to a random page. Found a drawing of Lake Michigan, the shoreline rendered in quick, confident strokes. She'd captured the movement of water, the weight of sky, the feeling of standing at the edge of something vast. Had she drawn this while he was at some meeting? While waiting for him to come home? While already planning her escape? Didn't matter now. She was gone, living her life, happy without him. And Lorenzo was sitting in a cheap apartment in a neighborhood he'd never worked, trying to figure out who he was when he wasn't Lorenzo Vieri, crime boss, empire builder, man in control. The answer, so far, was nobody. But maybe nobody was a place to start. The first week in the Wicker Park apartment, Lorenzo did nothing. Literally nothing. He woke up when his body decided to wake up, made coffee in a machine that cost $30 instead of $3,000, and sat by the window watching strangers live their lives. No meetings, no phone calls about shipments or territory disputes. No decisions that affected hundreds of people and millions of dollars. Just coffee and silence and the strange discomfort of having nothing to do. By day 4, he was crawling out of his skin. This is stupid, he told Marco on the phone. I should come back. You've been gone 4 days. Exactly. Things are probably falling apart. Nothing's falling apart. We handled the Detroit situation, the Colombians are happy, and revenue is up 3% from last month. Marco paused. Boss, you need to let go. We got this. Lorenzo hung up feeling useless, which was probably the point, he realized. For 20 years, he'd made himself indispensable. Built systems that required his constant input, maintained relationships that needed his personal touch. All of it designed to ensure he was always needed, always in control. But Marco was right. The machine ran fine without him. That should have been satisfying. Instead, it felt like confirmation that Lorenzo Vieri, stripped of his empire and his role, was just a 42-year-old man with no hobbies, no friends outside his crew, and no idea how to exist without power. On day 8, he left the apartment, just walked. No destination. The neighborhood was different from what he knew. Coffee shops with ironically misspelled names, vintage stores, young people with artistic ambitions and flexible employment. Nobody recognized him. Nobody cared. He ended up at a park, watching kids play soccer while their parents talked on the sidelines. Normal people doing normal things. The kind of life he'd never had, never wanted. Until now, maybe. A woman sat down on the bench next to him. 60-something, gray hair, kind face. She had a book and a to-go cup of something that smelled like chai. Beautiful day, she said. Lorenzo nodded. Small talk with strangers wasn't his strength, but she seemed harmless. You new to the neighborhood? She asked. I walk through here every day, never seen you before. Just moved in, trying it out. Well, welcome, I'm Margaret. She extended her hand. He shook it. Lorenzo. Italian? My late husband was Italian. Couldn't cook worth a damn, but he could argue about anything for hours. She smiled at the memory. You have that same look about you, like you're used to being right. That made him laugh, unexpectedly. I'm used to people letting me think I'm right. Not the same thing. Margaret seemed to appreciate that answer. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the soccer game. One kid scored, celebrated wildly. His parents cheered from the sideline. You have kids? Margaret asked. No? Married? Divorced. Recently. Ah. She sipped her chai. That's a hard thing. I'm sorry. Lorenzo found himself talking before he could stop. It was my fault. I was so focused on work, I didn't notice my wife drowning until she'd already left. By the time I figured it out, she was gone. Margaret considered this. You try to get her back? She doesn't want me back. Made that very clear. And now you're sitting in a park in a neighborhood you just moved to, looking like a man who lost his compass. Accurate. Painfully accurate. I don't know who I am without her, Lorenzo admitted, or without my work. I built this whole life, this whole identity, and it turns out none of it matters if you're alone. Well, that's not quite true, Margaret said. It matters. You built something. That's real. But you're right that it's not enough. Work and power, those are great, but they don't keep you warm at night. They don't laugh at your jokes or hold your hand when you're scared. I'm never scared. She gave him a look that said she didn't believe him. Everyone's scared of something, Lorenzo. Usually the same things. Being alone, being forgotten, dying without having mattered. The people who say they're not scared are just lying better. What were you scared of? Losing my husband. And then I did. 3 years ago. Cancer. And you know what I learned? She closed her book, meeting his eyes. The thing you're scared of losing? You survive losing it. You don't want to. You think you can't, but you do. And then you figure out who you are on the other side. And who are you? On the other side? Margaret smiled. Still figuring that out. But I'm here, aren't I? Still showing up. Still finding things worth seeing. She gestured at the park. Like kids playing soccer on a Tuesday afternoon. Like conversations with strangers who look like they need someone to talk to. Lorenzo sat with that. The idea that survival was enough, that showing up was enough. It ran counter to everything he'd built his life around. Excellence, dominance, winning at all costs. Thank you, he said. For what? For talking to me like a person instead of... He trailed off, not sure how to finish. Instead of what? Instead of what I am. Margaret studied him with sharp eyes. And what's that? Lorenzo almost told her. Almost laid it out. The empire, the violence, the whole criminal enterprise he'd spent 2 decades building. But something stopped him. Maybe the kindness in her face. Maybe the fact that sitting here talking to her, he felt more human than he had in months. Someone who forgot how to be just a person, he said instead. She patted his hand, the gesture maternal and comforting. Well, you're remembering now. That's something. After Margaret left, Lorenzo sat alone on the bench for another hour. Then he walked home, because the apartment was home now, or at least trying to be, and did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He made dinner. Just pasta and jarred sauce from the corner store, nothing fancy, but he cooked it himself, set a plate at the table, ate without his phone or a book or any distraction, just eating, just existing. It felt weird, but also okay. Yet, 2 weeks into his self-imposed exile, Lorenzo got a call from an unknown number. His instinct was to ignore it, but something made him answer. Mr. Vieri, this is Dr. Rachel Hoffman. I'm a therapist. Your associate Marco reached out about scheduling a session. Lorenzo was going to kill Marco. I didn't ask for a therapist. I'm aware. Marco was quite clear about that. But he was also clear that you're going through a difficult transition and might benefit from professional support. Her voice was calm, professional, completely unbothered by his tone. I have an opening Thursday at 4. No pressure, but the first session is already paid for. Might as well use it. I don't need therapy. Most people who need therapy say that. It's very common. A pause. Mr. Vieri, I've worked with men in high-stress professions for 15 years. CEOs, surgeons, people whose entire identity is built around being in control. And I can tell you from experience, the hardest thing they ever do is admit they need help processing emotions they've been ignoring. You don't know anything about me. True. But Marco does. And he's worried enough to call a therapist he found through considerable research. That tells me something. Lorenzo wanted to hang up, should have hung up. Instead, Thursday at 4? My office is in Lincoln Park. I'll text you the address. After hanging up, Lorenzo called Marco. You set me up with a therapist? You're welcome. Marco didn't sound remotely apologetic. Boss, you've been sitting in that apartment for 2 weeks doing nothing. You need to talk to someone. I talked to you. I'm your business partner, not your therapist. There's a difference. Marco's voice was firm. Just go to one session. If you hate it, you never have to go back. But at least try. Lorenzo wanted to argue. But Margaret's words came back. Everyone's scared of something. The people who say they're not are just lying better. Fine, one session. That's all I'm asking. Thursday came too fast. Lorenzo almost didn't go, stood outside Dr. Hoffman's building for 10 minutes before finally walking inside. The office was on the 3rd floor, decorated in neutral tones that probably cost a fortune to look that intentionally calming. Dr. Hoffman was younger than he expected. Early 40s, dark hair pulled back, sharp eyes that probably missed nothing. She shook his hand firmly. Thanks for coming. I know this probably isn't your first choice for a Thursday afternoon. It's not. Fair enough. Let's start simple. Tell me why you're here. Lorenzo sat in the chair across from her desk. Leather, expensive, comfortable. I'm here because my second-in-command thinks I'm falling apart. Are you? I don't know. Maybe. What would falling apart look like for you? Good question. Lorenzo thought about it. Not being in control. Not knowing what happens next. Caring about things I can't fix. And you're experiencing all of those? Yeah. Dr. Hoffman made a note on her tablet. Tell me about your divorce. So he did. Not everything. He wasn't stupid enough to confess crimes to someone who could be subpoenaed, but the emotional reality. The discovery of Isabella's departure, the months of not understanding, the letter that shattered his illusions. She left because I was never present, Lorenzo said. I thought providing for her was enough. Turns out presence matters more than money. That's a significant realization. How did it feel when you understood that? Like the ground dropped out from under me. Everything I thought I knew about my marriage, about my life. It was all wrong. I was wrong. And being wrong is hard for you. I built my entire career on being right, on reading situations correctly, making the right calls, staying 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Being wrong about the most important relationship in my life? Lorenzo shook his head. That's not just hard, it's foundational. If I was wrong about that, what else am I wrong about? Dr. Hoffman leaned back in her chair. That's a terrifying question. Most people spend their whole lives avoiding it. The fact that you're asking it means you're already doing the work. What work? The work of becoming someone you can live with, someone who can exist outside the role you've built. She studied him. Lorenzo, can I ask you something? When was the last time you did something just for yourself? Not for business, not for image, not for any strategic reason, just because you wanted to. He couldn't remember, honestly couldn't remember a single thing in recent years that he'd done purely for enjoyment. I don't know. That's what we're going to work on. Finding out who Lorenzo is when he's not performing the role of Lorenzo Vieri. The session lasted 50 minutes. Afterward, Lorenzo sat in his car for a while, processing. Dr. Hoffman had asked questions he'd never considered, pushed on assumptions he'd never examined. It was uncomfortable, but also necessary. He scheduled another session for the following week. A month into his new life, Lorenzo developed routines. Morning walks through the neighborhood, coffee at a place called The Grind, where the barista started remembering his order. Therapy on Thursdays, dinners he cooked himself, slowly getting better at it, and books. He'd never been a reader, no time, no interest, but the apartment had come with a small bookshelf, and he felt obligated to fill it. He started with thrillers, moved to biographies, eventually found himself reading philosophy. You're reading Seneca? Dr. Hoffman said during their fourth session, noticing the book he'd brought. Marco recommended it, said the Stoics might resonate. And do they? Yeah, actually. This idea that you can't control external events, only your response to them, that's useful. How so? Lorenzo thought about how to explain it. I spent my whole life trying to control everything. Territory, money, people, outcomes. And it worked, mostly. But Isabella leaving, I couldn't control that. It happened anyway. And I've been stuck because I keep trying to solve a problem that doesn't have a solution. So what does Seneca suggest? Accept what I can't control. Focus on what I can. My response, my growth, who I become in the aftermath. He set the book down. It sounds simple, but it's the hardest thing I've ever tried to do. Why? Because accepting that Isabella is gone, that she's happy without me, that I lost her through my own failures, that means sitting with consequences I can't fix, and I'm not good at that. You're learning, though. That's why you're here. True. Lorenzo was learning, slowly, painfully, but learning. He'd also started volunteering. Community service from his plea deal required 20 hours a month, and he'd chosen a food bank in his new neighborhood. Every Saturday morning, he sorted donations, packed boxes, helped load trucks. The first day, he'd felt ridiculous. Lorenzo Vieri, crime boss, wearing a volunteer t-shirt and organizing canned goods. But the coordinator, a woman named Patricia, who ran the operation with military precision, treated him like anyone else. You're on green beans today, she'd said, pointing to a pallet. Organized by expiration date, oldest in front. No recognition, no fear, no special treatment, just work. He'd sorted green beans for 3 hours. By the fourth Saturday, he actually looked forward to it. The physical labor, the simple task, the way Patricia would nod approval when he finished a section. Small validations, but they mattered. You're getting faster, she said one morning, watching him work through a delivery of pasta. Practice. You've been here a month. Most court-ordered volunteers quit after 2 weeks. She handed him water. Why are you still showing up? Where else would I be? Patricia laughed. Fair point. Well, keep it up. We need reliable people. Reliable. When was the last time someone had called him reliable instead of dangerous, powerful, or connected? It felt good in a way he hadn't expected. 6 weeks in, Lorenzo's phone rang. Marco, which was unusual. They texted mostly, kept calls for emergencies. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Actually, things are good. Really good. Marco sounded pleased with himself. The Milwaukee deal closed. The Morettis are expanding into our Northwest operations, with our permission and proper tribute. And Detroit wants to meet about a partnership. That's great. Why are you calling me? Because it's your empire, boss. Thought you'd want to know it's thriving. Lorenzo sat on his apartment balcony, phone to his ear, feeling strange about the news, pride that his organization was succeeding, but also distance, like Marco was reporting on someone else's company. You did this. You and the crew. We maintained what you built. There's a difference. Is there? Seems like you're doing fine without me. A long pause. Boss, are you coming back? Lorenzo watched traffic move below. People going places, living lives, existing in the space between destinations. I don't know, he admitted. Part of me wants to. Part of me thinks maybe it's time for something different. Different how? That's what I'm trying to figure out. He'd been thinking about this more lately, especially in therapy. The question of what came next. Marco, be honest. If I walked away completely, could you run things? You're not walking away. Hypothetically. Another pause. Longer. Yeah, I could run it. Wouldn't be the same, but I could do it. Then maybe that's the answer. You take over officially. I step back, become a silent partner, draw income but stay out of operations. Boss, you're talking about retiring at 42. I'm talking about not dying in my office or in a prison cell because I was too proud to change. Lorenzo's voice was calm. You said it yourself months ago. I was distracted, reckless, making bad calls. That hasn't changed. If anything, stepping back has shown me I was holding on to control because I was afraid of who I'd be without it. And now? Now I'm figuring that out, and I can't do it while still running an empire. Marco was quiet for a long time. Then, if this is really what you want, I'll support it. But think about it carefully, boss. Once you step away, coming back isn't easy. I know. After hanging up, Lorenzo sat with the decision. It felt right and terrifying in equal measure. The empire had been his identity for so long, walking away seemed impossible. But so had surviving Isabella's departure, and he'd managed that, barely, but he had. Maybe that was the lesson. He was capable of surviving things he thought would destroy him, capable of changing when change seemed impossible. Dr. Hoffman's reaction was measured when he told her. How do you feel about it? Scared? Relieved? Not sure which is stronger. Both can be true. You're making a major life change. Fear and relief usually come together in those moments. She set down her tablet. What scares you most? That I'm nothing without the empire. That Lorenzo Vieri, stripped of power and status, is just empty. And what makes you think that might not be true? Lorenzo thought about Margaret in the park, Patricia at the food bank, the barista at the grind who knew his order. Small connections, small validations. People who knew him as just Lorenzo, not as a boss or a threat or a means to an end. Because I'm starting to like who I am without it, he said, or at least I'm starting to think I could be someone worth liking. That's significant growth. It doesn't feel significant. It feels like barely keeping my head above water. Most growth does. We expect transformation to be dramatic, but usually it's small adjustments over time. You cooking dinner instead of ordering in, you volunteering instead of hiding in your apartment, you sitting here talking about feelings instead of pretending you don't have them. Dr. Hoffman smiled. That's all growth, Lorenzo. Give yourself credit. He wanted to. But decades of measuring success by conquests and acquisitions made it hard to value small domestic victories. Still, he was trying. That had to count for something. 2 months after leaving the penthouse, Lorenzo made the decision official. He called a meeting with his inner circle, told them he was stepping back permanently, that Marco would take over as head of operations. You'll still draw full income, Marco explained to the group. Silent partner status. But day to day? That's on me now. The crew looked uncertain. Bobby spoke up first. Boss, you sure about this? We need you. You needed me, Lorenzo corrected. Past tense. Marco's been running things for 2 months and it's working. Better than when I was around, actually, because he's focused and I was falling apart. You weren't. I was. We all know it. Isabella leaving broke something in me, and I was making reckless calls because I didn't care if I lived or died. He met each man's eyes in turn. That's not fair to you. You deserve leadership that's present, clear-headed, invested in the future. That's Marco now. Sal cleared his throat. What will you do? Figure out who I am when I'm not this. Lorenzo gestured at the club, the empire, everything they'd built. Maybe nothing interesting. maybe something completely different, but I need to find out. The transition took another month to finalize. Contracts updated, accounts reorganized, power officially transferred. Lorenzo kept a stake, enough to live comfortably, enough to maintain some connection. But the control, the daily decisions, the weight of running an empire, that went to Marco. Who'd earned it? Who wanted it? Who could handle it? Lorenzo felt lighter after it was done. Untethered, but in a good way. Like he'd been carrying weight so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. 3 months in, he developed new routines. Morning walks extended to runs. He'd never been athletic, but his body craved movement. Therapy continued weekly. The food bank became a regular commitment, then he added tutoring at a youth center downtown. "You're good with kids," the coordinator said one afternoon, watching Lorenzo help a teenager with algebra. "I'm patient with problems that have clear solutions. Makes me better at math than life." She laughed. "Aren't we all?" The kid, Marcus, 15, smart but struggling, looked up from his homework. "Mr. V, this still doesn't make sense." Lorenzo leaned over, pointed at the equation. "You're making it too complicated. Strip it down to basics. What are you actually trying to find?" "The value of X." "Right. So everything else is just noise. Ignore the noise, focus on what matters." Marcus worked through it, got the answer, smiled. "Oh, that's actually easy." Most things are, once you cut through the bullshit. The coordinator raised an eyebrow at his language, but didn't comment. Lorenzo had learned she was fairly relaxed about volunteers who showed up consistently and helped the kids. He'd been showing up consistently for 6 weeks now, twice a week, helping with homework, sometimes just talking. The kids didn't know who he was, didn't care about his past. They just knew Mr. V was patient, explained things clearly, and occasionally bought them pizza. It felt good, useful in a way that running criminal operations never had. On the way home, Lorenzo stopped at the grind. The barista, Sarah, he'd learned her name finally, had his order ready. "Americano, extra shot." "You know me too well. You're here every day. I'd be bad at my job if I didn't know your order by now." She handed him the cup. "You seem different lately. Lighter, maybe?" "Yeah? Yeah, when you first started coming in, you had this intensity, like you were carrying the world. Now you just seem like a guy getting coffee." Lorenzo smiled. "That's exactly what I'm trying to be." Back at the apartment, he made dinner. Actual cooking now, not just pasta and jar sauce. He'd been watching cooking videos online, learning techniques. Tonight was chicken with lemon and herbs, roasted vegetables. Nothing fancy, but competent. He ate at the table, Seneca open next to his plate. The Stoic philosopher had become a companion of sorts, offering perspective when Lorenzo's mind spiraled. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. True. He'd spent months imagining life without Isabella would be unbearable, and it was hard, definitely hard. But bearable. More than bearable, actually. He was building something new, something that was just his. His phone buzzed. Text from Dr. Hoffman, confirming tomorrow's session. Another text from Marco. "Detroit deal closed. We're expanding." Lorenzo replied, "Congratulations, you earned it." He meant it. The empire was thriving under Marco's leadership, which meant Lorenzo's decision to step back had been right. The organization didn't need him, had maybe never needed him as much as he'd needed it. That should have hurt. Instead, it felt freeing. He finished dinner, cleaned up, and stood at his window looking out at the neighborhood. Lights in other apartments, people living their ordinary lives. For the first time in months, maybe years, Lorenzo felt like one of them. Not a boss, not a criminal, not even particularly special. Just a man trying to figure out how to be okay with who he was and what he'd lost. It wasn't the life he'd planned. Wasn't the empire and the power and the beautiful wife waiting at home. But it was his. Actually his. And that was starting to be enough. 4 months became 6. 6 became 8. Lorenzo stopped counting after a while, stopped measuring his new life against his old one. The apartment in Wicker Park became home in a way the penthouse never had. He knew his neighbors now, Mrs. Chen on the second floor who always had too many groceries, the college kids above him who played music too loud but were polite when he asked them to turn it down. Normal neighbor problems. Normal life. Therapy sessions had tapered to every other week. Dr. Hoffman said he was making progress, which Lorenzo supposed was true. He slept better now, ate regular meals, went entire days without thinking about Isabella, though she still appeared in his thoughts more than he'd like to admit. That's natural, Dr. Hoffman said during one session. 12 years don't disappear in 8 months, but you're building a life that exists independent of her absence. That's the goal. What if I don't want to stop thinking about her? Then you don't. But ask yourself why. Is it love or is it regret? Are you mourning the person or the idea of who you thought you were with her? Lorenzo didn't have an answer. Maybe both. Maybe it didn't matter anymore. The youth center had become his favorite commitment. Marcus, the kid he'd helped with algebra, now came specifically on days Lorenzo volunteered. They'd developed a rhythm, homework first, then basketball in the gym. Then Marcus would ask questions about life that Lorenzo did his best to answer honestly. "Mr. V, you ever been married?" Marcus asked one afternoon, dribbling the ball. "Yeah, it didn't work out." "Why not?" "I was a bad husband. Thought providing money was the same as being present. Learned too late it's not." Marcus took a shot, missed. "My dad's like that. Works all the time, barely home. Mom's always mad about it." "Your dad should listen to your mom, before it's too late. You tell him that." Lorenzo laughed. "I don't think your dad wants marriage advice from a divorced stranger." "Yeah, probably not." Marcus retrieved the ball. "You ever think about getting married again?" "Not really. I'm still figuring out how to be alone without being lonely. That seems like a prerequisite." "That's deep, Mr. V." "I have my moments." They played until the center closed. Lorenzo walked home through autumn darkness, Chicago settling into the early winter cold. His phone buzzed, Marco calling instead of texting. "Hey, what's up?" "Just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a while." Marco sounded good, confident. "How's the civilian life?" "Quiet." "Good. I'm tutoring kids, cooking actual meals, revolutionary stuff." "No regrets about stepping back?" Lorenzo thought about it. "Sometimes I see news about territory disputes or policy changes, and part of me wants to get involved. But then I remember why I left." "Which was?" "Because I was dying, Marco. Maybe not physically, but dying in every way that mattered. And staying would have killed whatever was left." Silence on Marco's end, then, "I get that. Glad you're doing better, boss." "I'm not your boss anymore, just Lorenzo." "Old habits. But yeah, glad you're doing better, Lorenzo." After hanging up, Lorenzo stopped at a corner store. The owner, Mr. Park, waved from behind the counter. "Lorenzo, I got those tomatoes you like, fresh today." "Thanks, Mr. Park." He bought tomatoes, fresh pasta, garlic. Ingredients for dinner. 6 months ago, he would have laughed at the idea of shopping for groceries being a highlight of his day. But here he was, genuinely pleased about tomatoes. Growth was weird. At home, he cooked, ate, cleaned up. Put on music, jazz, something Isabella used to play. He'd avoided her music for months, but lately it didn't hurt as much. Just reminded him of someone he'd loved and lost, which was sad but bearable. Everything was bearable now. That was the real change. Not happiness, exactly, but the absence of that crushing weight that had followed him for months after she left. His phone lit up. Unknown number, but local area code. He almost ignored it, then answered. "Hello?" Silence. Then a familiar voice. "Lorenzo?" His heart stopped. Literally stopped for a beat before slamming back into rhythm. "Isabella!" "Yeah, She paused. "I'm in Chicago, visiting my sister. I thought maybe... Could we meet? Just to talk?" Lorenzo sat down, his legs suddenly unreliable. "When?" "Tomorrow? There's a coffee shop near Millennium Park. 11 a.m.? I'll be there." "Okay, good. I'll see you then." She hung up. Lorenzo stared at his phone, trying to process what just happened. Isabella was in Chicago, wanted to meet. After 8 months of silence, she'd called. He should call Dr. Hoffman, should call Marco, should do something other than sit frozen on his couch, replaying her voice in his head. Instead, he just sat there until midnight, mind racing with possibilities and fears and hopes he'd thought he'd buried. Lorenzo didn't sleep. He lay in bed watching the ceiling, then gave up around 5 and went for a run. 10 miles through pre-dawn Chicago, pushing himself until his lungs burned and his thoughts quieted. Back at the apartment, he showered, changed clothes 3 times, settled on jeans and a sweater. Casual, normal. Not the $1,000 suits he used to wear like armor. He arrived at the coffee shop 20 minutes early, found a table near the window, ordered an Americano he didn't drink, watched people pass on the sidewalk, each one potentially Isabella until it wasn't. Then she walked in. Lorenzo's breath caught. She looked different, lighter somehow. Her hair was shorter, cut in a way that framed her face. She wore simple clothes, jeans, and a green jacket, no jewelry except small earrings. No wedding ring, obviously. No trace of the woman who'd lived in his penthouse and worn designer dresses to charity events. She looked happy. Actually, genuinely happy. And that hurt more than Lorenzo expected. She saw him, smiled tentatively, approached the table. Hi. Hi. Lorenzo stood, wasn't sure if he should hug her, settled for an awkward half gesture. You look good. Thanks. So do you. Different, but good. She sat down, set her bag on the empty chair. You lost weight. Stress diet, not recommended. That made her smile, small but real. They sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. The coffee shop buzzed around them. Conversations, espresso machines, normal people having normal days. How have you been? Isabella asked finally. Rebuilding. Therapy. Volunteering. Figuring out who I am without the empire. Lorenzo wrapped his hands around his cup for something to do. How about you? Good. Really good, actually. Teaching is everything I hoped it would be. I love my students, love Boston, love having a life that's just mine. That's great. I'm happy for you. And he was. That was the strange part. 8 months ago, hearing that Isabella was thriving would have destroyed him. Now it just felt like confirmation that she'd made the right choice. I read the article, Isabella said. The Tribune piece. That's actually why I wanted to meet. Yeah? You were honest. About us? About what went wrong. I wasn't expecting that. She looked out the window, gathering thoughts. I spent so long being angry at you, Lorenzo, for not seeing me, not valuing me, treating our marriage like an afterthought. And then I read your words, and I realized you didn't know. You genuinely didn't understand what you were doing wrong. That doesn't excuse it. No, it doesn't. But it helps me understand it. You weren't trying to hurt me. You were just so consumed by your world that you forgot I was in it. Lorenzo nodded. I thought control was love. If I kept everything safe and managed, that was caring for you. I didn't realize you needed presence more than protection. And I didn't tell you. I just went quiet and waited for you to notice. Isabella met his eyes. We were both bad at communicating. I made you into a villain in my head, but the truth is more complicated. I was still a bad husband. You were. And I was a passive wife who never asked for what I needed. She smiled sadly. We were wrong for each other in a lot of ways. Or maybe just wrong for each other at that time in our lives. Silence settled between them, but different now. Less awkward, more contemplative. Why did you want to meet? Lorenzo asked. Isabella took a breath. Because I wanted to see if the man from that article was real. If you'd actually changed, or if it was just good PR. She studied him. You have changed. I can see it. You're softer, more present. The Lorenzo I married would never have admitted fault publicly. The Lorenzo you married was an idiot. He was young. We both were. She paused. I also wanted to say I'm sorry for how I left. The letter, the disappearing act. That was cruel. I could have talked to you first, explained, but I was so afraid you'd convince me to stay, and I needed to go. You don't owe me an apology. You did what you had to do. Maybe. But I still hurt you, and I'm sorry for that. Isabella's voice was gentle. I never wanted to hurt you, Lorenzo. I just wanted to survive. I know. And you did. You're thriving, actually. That's what matters. They talked for 2 hours. Not about getting back together. That ship had sailed, and they both knew it. But about their lives now, the lessons they'd learned, the people they were becoming. Isabella told him about her students, her apartment with the big windows, the art collective she'd joined. Lorenzo told her about therapy, the youth center, his small apartment in Wicker Park. "You're tutoring kids?" She looked surprised. "Lorenzo Vieri, tutoring algebra? I'm good at it, apparently. Problems with clear solutions are my strength. Life doesn't have clear solutions. I'm learning that. Slowly, but learning." Eventually, the conversation wound down. Isabella checked her watch. "I should go. My sister's expecting me for lunch." They stood. This time, Lorenzo hugged her properly. She hugged back, and for a moment they were just two people who'd loved each other once and were trying to figure out how to let that go. "Take care of yourself," Isabella said, pulling back. "You too." "And Isabella?" He met her eyes. "Thank you." "For what?" "For leaving. I know that sounds strange, but you leaving forced me to become someone better. I'm not there yet, but I'm trying. And that wouldn't have happened if you'd stayed." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "You're welcome. And Lorenzo? I forgive you, completely. I hope you can forgive yourself." "Working on it." She left. Lorenzo watched her go, feeling something shift in his chest. Not closure, exactly, but acceptance. Isabella was happy. He was getting there. And their story had ended the way it needed to, not in chaos or bitterness, but in quiet acknowledgement that some things couldn't be fixed, only survived. He sat back down, ordered another coffee, and pulled out his phone. Texted Dr. Hoffman. "Big breakthrough today. See you Thursday." Then he texted Marco. "I'm good. Really good. Thanks for everything." Finally, he just sat there, drinking coffee, watching Chicago move around him. Present in the moment in a way he'd never been before. A year after Isabella left, Lorenzo stood in the youth center gym, watching Marcus dunk a basketball. The kid had grown 3 inches and found confidence Lorenzo barely recognized from that first algebra session. "Mr. V, you see that?" Marcus jogged over, grinning. "Hard to miss. You're getting good." "Good enough for the school team?" "Probably. You talked to the coach?" "Tryouts are next week. I'm nervous." Lorenzo sat on the bleachers, Marcus joining him. "Nervous means you care. That's good. Just remember, you miss every shot you don't take." "That's corny, Mr. V." "It's also true." They sat in comfortable silence. Other kids played pickup games, their shouts echoing off the gym walls. Normal chaos, normal life. "Mr. V, can I ask you something?" Marcus looked serious. "Why do you do this?" "Come here, help us with homework and stuff. You don't have to." Lorenzo thought about how to answer. "Because you remind me why people matter more than power. Because helping you figure out algebra is more satisfying than anything I did in my old life. Because showing up for you makes me someone I can live with." "That's heavy." "You asked." Marcus smiled. "Well, thanks. For showing up. It helps." "You're welcome." Patricia appeared in the doorway, waving Lorenzo over. He excused himself, leaving Marcus to rejoin the game. "Got a minute?" Patricia asked. "Sure." In her office, she gestured to a chair. "Lorenzo, you've been volunteering here for almost a year. Consistent, reliable, the kids love you. I wanted to ask if you'd be interested in a paid position." That surprised him. "Doing what?" "Program coordinator. You'd run the tutoring program, mentor at-risk youth, help with outreach. 20 hours a week, decent pay. Not a fortune, but steady." She studied him. "You're good at this. The kids respond to you. I think you could do real good here if you're interested." Lorenzo sat with the offer. A year ago, the idea of a part-time job working with kids would have been laughable. Lorenzo Vieri didn't work 20-hour weeks for modest pay. But Lorenzo Vieri didn't exist anymore. Not that version, anyway. "Can I think about it?" "Take your time. Position doesn't open until January, so you've got a month." He left the center thinking about Patricia's offer. Real work, meaningful work. Not empire building or territory control, but helping kids like Marcus figure out how to survive. It wasn't what he'd planned for his life, but nothing about the last year had been planned, and he was happier than he'd been in decades. At home, he called Dr. Hoffman. She answered on the second ring. "Lorenzo, we don't have a session today." "I know, I just wanted to tell you something. The youth center offered me a job, coordinator position. I think I'm going to take it." That's wonderful. How do you feel about it? Surprised, excited, a little scared. He paused. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this life. Now I can't imagine going back to the old one. That's significant growth. Dr. Hoffman's voice was warm. You should be proud of yourself. I'm getting there. After hanging up, Lorenzo made dinner, stir-fry, something he'd learned from a cooking class he'd taken on impulse. The class had been full of people learning skills for various reasons, and nobody had cared who he was or what he'd done. Just a guy learning to cook. Nothing more, nothing less. He ate at his small table, reading Seneca, and thought about the year. The destruction of everything he'd known. The slow, painful rebuild. The person he was becoming. Not better, necessarily. Just different. More honest. More present. More human. His phone buzzed. Marco. Crew wants to throw you a birthday dinner next month. You in? Lorenzo had forgotten his birthday was coming up. 43. Middle-aged, technically. Halfway through a life that had already been more than he'd expected. Sure. Keep it small. Will do. And boss, we're proud of you. What you've built this year. I haven't built anything. Wrong. You've built a life. That's harder than building an empire. Lorenzo set down his phone, Marco's words settling in. Maybe he was right. Maybe creating a life from scratch, learning to cook, showing up for kids, becoming someone who could sit with himself without armor. Maybe that was harder than anything he'd done before. And maybe that was okay. But December came cold and sharp. Lorenzo took the job at the youth center. Started in January, Patricia said, but he could begin transitioning now. Learning protocols, meeting staff, getting familiar with the systems. It felt good, purposeful. He also started dating, though that felt stranger. Dr. Hoffman had suggested it. Not seriously, just casually, testing the waters. He tried a dating app, gone on a few awkward dinners with women who were nice but not quite right. Then he'd met Anne at a bookstore. She was reading Seneca, same edition he owned, and he'd made a joke about Stoics in the wild. They'd talked for an hour, exchanged numbers, went for coffee the next week. Nothing serious, just company, conversation, the possibility of connection. I'm recently divorced, Lorenzo told her on their third date. Still figuring out how to do this. Me too, Anne said. She was a high school teacher, early 40s, divorced 3 years. It's weird, isn't it? Starting over at our age. Yeah, but maybe that's okay. We know ourselves better now. What we want, what we won't accept. That's optimistic. I'm trying optimism. It's new for me. Anne smiled. I like it. Keep trying. They weren't in love. Might never be. But they were two people who'd survived their own versions of catastrophe and were learning to trust again. That felt like enough for now. Sasimi chat. Lorenzo's birthday arrived on a Tuesday. The crew had reserved Giovanni's back room again, and Lorenzo showed up expecting a dozen people. Instead, he found 50. Not just his inner circle, but guys from the organization he barely knew. People he'd protected, employed, helped over the years. All there because Marco had put the word out. The boss was turning 43, and everyone wanted to show appreciation. This is too much, Lorenzo told Marco. This is exactly right. You built something that lasted, boss. People don't forget that. Dinner was loud, warm, full of stories and laughter. Sal cornered him at one point, already 3 drinks in. I'm proud of you, Sal said, weaving slightly. Watching you walk away from power, find something better. That takes guts. More guts than staying. Thanks, Sal. Mean it. You're a good man, Lorenzo. Better than you give yourself credit for. Later, Patricia showed up. Marco had invited her, apparently. She brought Marcus, who looked overwhelmed by the restaurant and the crowd, but stuck close to Lorenzo. This is where you used to work? Marcus asked, taking in the expensive decor, the well-dressed men, the obvious power dynamics. Something like that. Looks intense. It was. That's why I left. Marcus nodded, understanding more than Lorenzo expected. Smart kid. Would do fine in life if he kept making good choices. The evening wound down around 10. Lorenzo said his goodbyes, accepting hugs and handshakes and promises to stay in touch. Outside, the December air bit sharp and clean. Anne was waiting by his car. She'd come separately, not wanting to intrude on crew time. How was it? She asked. Good. Overwhelming, but good. Lorenzo unlocked the car. Want to grab a drink? I thought you'd never ask. They went to a quiet bar, sat in a corner booth, talked about nothing important. Work, books, the approaching holidays, normal conversation, normal connection. Comfortable. Can I tell you something? Lorenzo said eventually. Sure. A year ago, I thought my life was over. My wife left. My identity was shattered. I didn't know who I was or how to survive. And now, he gestured at nothing, meaning everything. Now I'm sitting here with you, working a job I love, becoming someone I can actually stand to be. And it feels impossible that both realities could exist in the same life. Anne reached across the table, took his hand. That's called growth. It feels impossible because transformation always does, but you did it anyway. We did it. I had help. Sure, but you did the work. Give yourself credit. Lorenzo squeezed her hand, grateful for her presence, her understanding. They weren't in love, might never be, but they were two people learning to be okay again, and that was its own kind of beautiful. 2 years after Isabella left, Lorenzo stood in a grocery store on a random Saturday afternoon debating between types of pasta. Ridiculous problem, the kind of mundane decision that would have made him laugh 2 years ago. Now he took it seriously. Penne or rigatoni? Anne was coming over for dinner, and the sauce he'd planned worked better with one than the other. He reached for the rigatoni. Lorenzo? He froze, turned slowly. Isabella stood 3 feet away, shopping basket in hand, looking just as surprised as he felt. Isabella, hi. His heart hammered, but different than before. Not panic, just surprise. What are you doing in Chicago? Visiting my sister. She just had a baby. Isabella gestured vaguely. I'm picking up groceries for them. You? I live here. Well, not here. Wicker Park. But I shop here. He was babbling, stopped himself. Sorry, you surprised me. Same, I thought, well, I don't know what I thought. That we'd never run into each other randomly? She smiled. Chicago's big, but not that big. They stood awkwardly in the pasta aisle. Other shoppers navigated around them, oblivious to the weight of this moment. You look good, Isabella said. Different. Happier, maybe? I am. Happier. Different. Both. Lorenzo gestured at his basket. Vegetables, chicken, ingredients for an actual meal. Learning to cook, working at a youth center, normal stuff. That's wonderful. Really? She seemed to mean it. I'm glad you found your way. Me too. How's Boston? Amazing. I love it there. The teaching, the art scene, everything. Isabella's face lit up talking about it. I'm actually having my first gallery show next month. Small venue, but it's mine. That's incredible. Congratulations. Thanks. It feels surreal, but good surreal. Silence fell, but comfortable this time. Two people who'd loved each other once, whose lives had diverged completely, meeting randomly in a grocery store like normal humans. I should go, Isabella said finally. My sister's waiting. But it was good to see you, Lorenzo. Really good. You too. And Isabella? He met her eyes. I'm happy for you. The life you built, the person you became. You deserve all of it. She smiled, tears in her eyes. So do you. Keep being happy, okay? I'll try. She left. Lorenzo watched her go, feeling something settle in his chest. Peace, maybe? Acceptance. The understanding that some stories end quietly, without drama or resolution, just two people who'd hurt each other learning to exist in separate worlds. He picked up the rigatoni and continued shopping. At checkout, his phone buzzed. Anne. Still on for tonight? I'm bringing wine. Definitely. Making your favorite. You're the best. See you at 7. Lorenzo paid for groceries, drove home through late afternoon traffic, and thought about how strange life was. 2 years ago, running into Isabella would have destroyed him. Now it was just a moment, poignant but not devastating. He'd survived. More than survived. He'd rebuilt himself into someone who could stand in a grocery store with his ex-wife and feel genuine happiness for her success. That was growth. Real, measurable growth. At home, he cooked. Anne arrived at 7 with wine and stories from her classroom. They ate dinner, talked, laughed. She stayed over, not for the first time. They'd been dating 9 months now, taking it slow, but it was becoming something real, not the all-consuming passion of his marriage to Isabella, but something steadier, more sustainable, built on actual presence instead of assumptions and distance. "You're quiet tonight," Anne said, curled next to him on the couch. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, just thinking." Lorenzo pulled her closer. "I ran into my ex-wife today, at the grocery store." Anne stiffened slightly. "How was that?" "Fine, actually. We talked, caught up briefly. She's doing well, I'm doing well. It was okay." "That's good, right?" "Yeah, it is." Lorenzo kissed the top of her head. 2 years ago, seeing her would have sent me spiraling. Now it's just part of life. We existed together once, now we don't. That's it. You really have come far. We both have. They sat in comfortable silence, some documentary playing on TV that neither was really watching. Outside, Chicago settled into Saturday night. Traffic noise, distant sirens, the endless hum of a city that never really slept. Lorenzo's phone sat on the coffee table, dark and quiet. No emergencies, no territory disputes, no desperate calls from his crew. Marco had everything handled. The empire ran smoothly without him, and Lorenzo had built something better. Smaller, yes. Less powerful, definitely. But his. Actually, genuinely his. He thought about the journey from that 4 a.m. morning when he'd found Isabella's letter to this moment, sitting on a couch with a woman he was learning to love, working a job that mattered, becoming someone he could look at in the mirror without flinching. The journey had been brutal. Months of feeling like he was drowning, weeks of not knowing who he was, days of wondering if survival was even possible. But he'd made it. Not perfectly, not smoothly, but thoroughly. And the man he'd become, the one who tutored kids and cooked dinner and showed up for people instead of controlling them, that man was worth the pain of getting here. "I love you," Lorenzo said quietly. Anne looked up, surprised. They hadn't said it yet, both still cautious from their previous marriages. "Yeah? Yeah, I do. Not the way I loved Isabella. That was possession disguised as love. This is different. Better. You're my friend, my partner, someone I choose to be with, not someone I need to complete me." Anne's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too. Have for a while, actually. Just didn't know how to say it." They kissed, and it felt like beginning. Not the first chapter, that had been written and closed, but a new story built on different foundations. Honesty, presence, the understanding that love was work and choice, and showing up every day. The kind of love Lorenzo should have given Isabella, but hadn't known how. The kind he could give Anne because he'd learned the hard way what mattered. Later that night, after Anne fell asleep, Lorenzo stood at his apartment window looking out at the city. Lights stretched in every direction, millions of people living their lives, making their choices, surviving their own catastrophes. He thought about Isabella in Boston, probably sleeping in her apartment after visiting her sister's new baby. Happy, thriving, exactly where she needed to be. He thought about Marco running the empire with competence and care, proving that Lorenzo's legacy could exist without Lorenzo. He thought about Marcus and the other kids at the youth center, finding their way with Lorenzo's help. And he thought about Anne sleeping in his bed, trusting him with her heart after her own hard journey. All these people, all these lives touching his in ways that mattered more than power ever had. Lorenzo Vieri had built an empire and lost everything that mattered. Then he'd torn it all down and built a life instead. The life wasn't perfect. He still had bad days, still missed Isabella sometimes, though more the idea of her than the reality. Still struggled with control issues and the temptation to manage outcomes instead of accepting them. But he was trying. Every day he was trying to be present, to show up, to value people over power. And most days, he succeeded. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Lorenzo turned from the window, checked that the door was locked, turned off lights. Normal evening routine, normal life. He climbed into bed next to Anne, careful not to wake her. Tomorrow he'd tutor kids, make dinner, call Marco to check in. Continue building this quiet, meaningful existence he'd carved from the ruins of his old life. Not the life he'd planned, but the life he'd needed. And finally, after 43 years of chasing power and control and all the wrong things, Lorenzo Vieri had learned the one lesson that actually mattered. Some losses are permanent. Some mistakes can't be fixed. Some people leave and never come back. But you survive anyway. You rebuild anyway. You become someone better anyway. Not because the pain stops or the regret fades or the loss becomes acceptable, but because survival itself is the victory. Because showing up is the achievement. Because learning to be human, flawed, present, trying, is worth more than any empire you could build. Lorenzo closed his eyes, Anne's breathing steady beside him, and finally let himself rest. The war was over. He'd lost and won in equal measure. And that, he'd learned, was just called living.